Today, we were holding this hearing to engage residents and individuals on the total effect of this package moving forward. Our host member is Representative Dawn Kiefer. Dawn, thank you so much for hosting, and I'm going to turn it over to you for introductions and welcomes.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for coming today. We're grateful to have this opportunity, and I think in the past, the bills have been sent to us from the Senate, and it's kind of been left to the appropriation, and rank and file just anticipate getting whatever their feedback is from that. And what we're finding is a lot of surprises in it. So I really appreciate the lead that Representative Grove has taken. He and Representative Phillips Hill and I went through just the tax code yesterday, and we're shocked by our findings. So we hope to delve into that a little bit today and give everybody here, all of our taxpayers, an opportunity to have their voice heard. Let's start with, we're going to do an opening prayer, and then we'll do the pledge. So Mr. Panabaker is going to lead us in a prayer.
Father.
It's calling you.
That's divine intervention. Yeah. Can I stand next to you? Did I get that number? Yeah. Do I get the long distance bill? Yeah. Father, we do ask your presence here with us. Help us see problems and find ways to fix them. Amen.
Amen. Okay.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Introduction members. We'll just do a quick introduction of members, starting to my right.
Thank you, Representative Grove. I'm Representative Kate Klunk. I represent the 169th District in Southern York County.
Hello, everyone. Representative Dan Mell from the 91st District in Adams County, home of Gettysburg, where America has won its freedom.
Good afternoon. Kristen Phillips Hill, representative in the 93rd District, Southern York County.
Good afternoon. Chris Dush, the 66th District, Jefferson and Indiana counties. Punxsutawney Phil happens to be one of my constituents.
Frank Ryan, 101st District, Lebanon County, retired Marine.
Thank you. First presenter today, we have Terry Fitzpatrick, President and CEO of the Energy Association of Pennsylvania. Come on up, Terry. Thank you so much for joining us. And anybody in the audience, a lot of the packet material, some of the testifying packet materials are off on the table to the left, so feel free to pick those up. And Terry, whenever you're ready.
Oh, there we go. Okay. I don't have written testimony, but I'll give my oral comments here. First of all, I just want to thank you very much for the invitation to be here. Also want to thank this caucus for its efforts on behalf of the taxpayers of Pennsylvania. Really appreciate that too. I'm the president of the Energy Association of Pennsylvania. We're a trade group of the electric and gas utilities operating in the state. We help with advocacy as well as sharing best practices among our members. We have stated our opposition to the Senate's revenue package, which was passed last week as amended into House Bill 542. Now, I'm not going to comment on all the particulars of that. It dealt with a lot of things. I will focus on the impact on electric and gas utilities and their customers, and especially their customers. At the outset, I want to say that, we recognize the difficult fiscal situation that's facing the Commonwealth. We also understand, that there are different opinions about how to address that, whether through greater efficiencies in state government or whether there is a need for additional revenue. And then if you think there's a need for revenue, where it comes from. Should it come from taxes? Should it come from other things, liquor sales, increased gaming? Again, I'm not going to get into that myself. I know there's strong opinions on that, but we're going to focus on the impact on electric and gas customers. And I think to sum it up, we object to attempting to solve the Commonwealth's fiscal problem by raising the price of essential utility services. House Bill 542 would apply a gross receipts tax to retail sales of natural gas at a rate of 5.7%, and it would raise the current gross receipts tax on electricity sales from 5.9% to 6.5%. We're still looking at the impact of this on customers. I know I've gotten some feedback already asking what's this going to do to the different types of customers. We're starting to look at that, and I want to be careful here because there's a lot of complications when you do that, and I don't want to mislead anybody, but we have done some preliminary analysis. And let's say for a gas customer, let's take a residential customer, pretty small usage, but using gas for heating. We think the impact could be somewhere around $60 per year. That might be fairly typical, or $5 a month. For electricity, again, for a residential customer, we're talking now about an increase. We're not talking about putting the tax on for the first time. So the impact's smaller. It could be maybe around $12 per year or about $1 per month. For some customers, it's going to be less than $1 per month. Bigger customers, of course, with greater energy usage are going to have much bigger bills. I don't have numbers on that. However, the Pennsylvania Chamber has stated publicly, after talking to its members, which include a lot of the big manufacturers, that they gave a particular example of a company that had done a calculation that it was going to face additional annual costs of up to $3 million a year. For another customer, I think in the eastern part of the state, they said it could be $1 million a year. For many others, could be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars as far as the impact. And I want to make the point, too, that trying to solve this problem through a tax on utilities, through gross receipts, does cause some distortions and unfairness. And I recognize for many of you that's probably a secondary point because maybe your main point is we don't want any new taxes. I understand that. But if you're going to do it, there is some thought that needs to be given to how you do it, because doing it through taxes on utilities is going to cause some distortion, some winners and losers, if you will. For example, I have a friend who lives in Mifflinburg in Union County, where they have a municipal electric system, and they heat with heating oil. That person won't face any increased gross receipts tax because municipal electrics are exempted, and heating oil is not subject to the gross receipts tax. Whereas somebody who lives in the Harrisburg area and maybe heats with gas from UGI and pays PPL for their bill, they are going to be subject to those costs that I talked about. Another thing to consider is I know I've gotten some inquiries about, well, what's this going to do to municipalities and school districts? Because they are customers, they will pay their part of this gross receipts tax. And if you take a school district that heats its buildings with natural gas, could be very significant impacts. And again, we're looking at this, but the preliminary numbers show, depending on the size of the school district, there could be annual additional costs in the tens, perhaps even $100,000 for those school districts as a result of this. So the type of tax you use does cause some winners and losers, and I would ask that that be considered too. Now, as I mentioned, I'm not talking about all the different taxes. I know there's a lot more in this. There's the PJM tax on wholesale electricity transactions. There's the Marcellus Shale severance tax. There's increases on telephone taxes, mobile telephone, and that's just on the utility side of things. There's other things in there as well. But, I just tried to focus on what we're particularly concerned with and on behalf of our customers, what we're concerned with. So with that, thanks again for the chance to be here. I'll be happy to respond to any questions.
Thanks, Terrence. I'm actually glad you were bringing that up about the school districts and that sort of thing, because what a lot of people don't realize is there are cascading effects to this. If you have the natural gas being taxed with the gross receipts tax, and then the sales taxes on top of that are computed after the imputation of the gross receipts, and then for the companies that are developing the electricity using gas, they have to tack on another increase on gross receipts. And once that total's done, then you've got a sales tax on top of that. So you've got a tax upon a tax upon a tax upon a tax. And for our municipalities especially, when you're talking to tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars over 500 different school districts, not to mention municipal and county jails, county courthouses, all the different buildings that are heated and cooled in this state with natural gas, and the electricity is produced by that natural gas, our property taxes are going to end up having to go through the roof. And I think it's going to be a significant impact that I honestly don't think the people who put this package together took into consideration. And I want to, do you have any further numbers on maybe what it would cost even the Commonwealth? I just figured a 6% on top of the Department of Corrections for our institution that could amount to about $3 million a year.
Yeah, we haven't run numbers on that, but you're exactly right. Yes, places like the Department of Corrections are going to feel that as well. Municipalities will feel it as well. You know, the bigger you are and the more you use, the more impact it's going to have. But particularly with school districts, with all the buildings they have and the substantial heating costs that they have, you know, that was one in particular where I tried to focus. But we have more work to do in the numbers, and we will keep you informed as we do that. Okay.
Terrence, thank you so much. Just a
Thank you.
clarification on the numbers. So when you calculated those preliminary numbers, you did not factor in increased costs to consumers based on the PJM tax and the severance tax?
No,
So
no,
it's strictly
it's a good
based
point.
on
Yeah.
what we're experiencing now?
No, that's exactly a good point, because somebody might face it multiple times as part of their telephone bill, as their mobile phone bill, you know, and I think as Representative Dush said, the cascading effects. In fact, gross receipts taxes, I've looked at some things by the Nonpartisan Tax Foundation, and gross receipts taxes are really criticized by people who are tax policy experts because of these cascading effects.
So we could anticipate then that your numbers are actually
Yes.
low?
As far as the ultimate impact on a consumer from this total tax package, yes. I'm just focusing on the things that were done to electric and gas utilities.
Very good.
Correct.
Thank you very
Sure.
much.
Thank you. I just wanted to throw a comment out here when Representative Dush talked about the cascading effect. I started thinking about all the businesses in my district that use natural gas to make their product, which in turn is going to cause our consumable goods. You know, is it the start of an inflationary problem?
It's certainly an added, anytime you add, you know, I think just basic economics, anytime you add to the cost of production, you're putting upward pressure on prices.
Yeah, thank you.
And energy is one of the biggest success stories that we've had in Pennsylvania during these tough economic times. We are such a big energy state, an energy exporter. To us, it seems somewhat ironic to be taxing the very source of success and one of the best things Pennsylvania's had going for it.
Yeah, it's quite ironic, isn't it, that we want to go after and basically punish the people that are supplying the jobs and keeping us afloat. Thank you.
Just wanted to talk a little bit about the cascading effect. So if I'm a cell phone company, I have to heat my building. So now I have higher energy costs that are going to be passed on to my end users. On top of that, I have the gross receipts tax on the telecommunication industry to pass on to consumers as well. And part of the sales tax is calculated on the gross receipts tax because we have double taxation in this state. So at the end of the day, all these utility taxes will be compounded against each other on a lot of consumer products that are in this, or basically that we're going to purchase in the Commonwealth, because generally I don't know too many businesses that eat those taxes moving forward.
That's a good point, Representative, yes.
And then we have the issue of competitiveness with other states. So if you have a state with lower energy costs, you're more than likely going to move your operations to those other states to be competitive. And if you see the IFO reports, Independent Fiscal Office reports, consistently tell us we're losing working class populations who actually pay the taxes in this Commonwealth versus the increase in aging population. So we have businesses leave this state. We have those younger income tax earners leave this state. So we may end up having more problems with our revenue structure because of these higher taxes imposed potentially.
Right, and I think, a business looks at the entire environment that they're going to face, but certainly when you see numbers like $3 million a year in additional costs, it's very significant, and it is a concern.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Thank you so much for taking time
Thank
out
you.
today to present testimony. Thank you very much. Next is Joe Keckerman. Did I say that right? From Correctman. From Calpine Power Plant? Cressman, yeah. Sorry, Joe. I know. I tried.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us and at your
Yeah,
leisure, sir.
I have a little bit of an introduction on Calpine, and then I really have very brief remarks on the tax situation. But again, thank you, Representative Grove and members of the Taxpayer Caucus for inviting me here to speak today. I'm Joe Cressman, Director of Government and Regulatory Affairs for Calpine Corporation. Just for a little bit of background, Calpine Corporation is an independent power producer. We have a national portfolio, 80 power plants in operation or under construction, representing approximately 26,000 megawatts of generating capacity. We're the largest geothermal power producer in the country. We have 725 megawatts in California, base load 24/7 renewable generation, and the largest operator of combined heat and power facilities in the U.S. Through our wholesale operations and retail businesses, we serve customers in 25 states, Canada, and Mexico. We're not a regulated utility receiving a guaranteed return. Rather, we compete against other generators to sell wholesale power into markets. We also compete to sell power directly to retail customers. We've moved into the retail segment over the last 2 years. And through our retail business, again, the economics of supply and demand are kind of fundamental to our business. About 95% of the electricity generated by Calpine fleet is from natural gas. We're the largest gas generator in the country at this point in time. Overall, Calpine burns more than 10% of all natural gas consumed by the power industry, making us one of the largest consumers of natural gas in the U.S. and the largest among all power generators. Despite our size, Calpine's fleet is the cleanest among the major players in the American independent power producer sector. In PJM, which serves Pennsylvania, Calpine owns approximately 5,000 megawatts of generating capacity. 1,695 megawatts of that generation is located here in the Commonwealth, Bethlehem 1 and Bethlehem 2, and then York 1, which is in York County. We also have an additional 828 megawatts currently under construction in York County, and that'll become operational later this year or early next. Virtually all our plants run on natural gas, with nearly 90% of our plants located in PJM having the capability of burning oil as a backup fuel. Clearly, natural gas has been a huge advantage for the Commonwealth. The natural gas industry accounts for tens of thousands of jobs in Pennsylvania. Electric power generation accounts for a growing majority of gas consumed in the state. The electric power sector currently uses about 40% of all natural gas consumed in the state at this point in time. There's been a lot of investment being made in plants like ours. I mentioned our York 2 plant that's under construction right now. Over the last 2 years, we had 2 plants go operational, totaling about 1,660 megawatts that were developed and owned by Panda Power. But as we sit here today, there are 7 plants being built right now, York 1 being one of them. For a frame of reference, that totals 6,952 megawatts of new gas generation capacity that's under construction right now. When you take into account what was built previously and what's being under construction right now, it probably represents about $10 billion of investment that's occurring in the state. And again, all this is being done with private capital, public capital. There's no ratepayer liability for any of these generators at this point in time. So the economics of gas is very important. To give you a little bit of a frame of reference, our York 2 plant, which is going to be 830 megawatts, that will consume 5,900 MMBTUs of gas per hour when it's operating. So that gives you an idea in terms of how much gas it consumes. All that said as a background here, I'm here today to say that we really do not have a specific position on the severance tax. From our perspective, it's not clear if the tax will get passed along in terms of increasing gas costs, or if it will actually just be an extra cost of business that producers will pay should it go forward. To the extent, again, that it raises the cost of gas, and recognizing that gas is it's a market. Pennsylvania's a supplier, Ohio's a supplier, West Virginia's a supplier, and certainly there's, gas coming up from the Gulf. So it's not clear, again, that the price will get passed through. But if it gets passed through, then our cost of gas will increase. We bid into the PJM market, and we will adjust our bids accordingly. So again, to the extent that ultimately it does get passed through, we will factor it into our offers, and then the cost of electricity could go up. I mean, the way PJM works, it's a centrally cleared market, and obviously the highest cost resource that's needed at the time is what sets the clearing price. So if indeed gas prices would go up, and a gas unit is on the margin at that particular point in time, then the cost of electricity would raise by whatever went up as a result of the severance tax. But again, as I sit here today, and others may have more details than I would have on it, it's not clear to us that this cost would necessarily end up in the price of gas. It just may, impact the margins that producers have. So from our perspective, again, we don't really see ourselves as having a direct dog in the fight, and therefore we've not taken a hard and fast approach. But I thought I'd give you a frame of reference in terms of, how important gas is to the power sector right now. That's really all I have. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Joe, thank you very much for your comment. If I could, just as a comment, in my years of business, I've only been in the legislature for 6 months. I would encourage you to have a position on this, and the only reason I suggest that is, generally speaking, the demand for gas and electricity for consumers is relatively inelastic, meaning that the consumer is relatively insensitive to the price changes. They have very, very few options. Manufacturers, however, are an entirely different issue. And when you mentioned that you use private capital to build your plants, the marginal efficiency of capital deteriorates significantly whenever you start passing these costs along to the producer, to the manufacturer that's unable to get those costs recovered in the marketplace. So it will make Pennsylvania significantly less attractive to begin with. So as an example, a manufacturer that has an increased cost of $3 million, their return on that private capital has just been negatively affected. The other reason I would encourage you to have a position is for those of us that are consumers, because of the way Pennsylvania does this, and we're doing it all the time throughout the Commonwealth, those payments that we're making on gross receipts tax are not tax deductible. They are to the manufacturer. But to the consumer, that means the effective tax rate on that is an after-tax cost of 6.5%, whereas if we were able to deduct it as a straight change, let's deal with it as either a tax issue or a spending issue. I happen to think we have a spending problem in the Commonwealth, but we are denying the citizens of the Commonwealth the opportunity to deduct those taxes that they're paying, which are a significantly large amount. Telephone, the electric bill, the gas bill, your cable bill, and all of those issues. We can't deduct that on our tax return, and having an unbelievably negative effect on our own citizens about whether or not that incidence of that tax falls to them as a relatively inelastic demand or to the federal government, which would bear part of the cost of that if it were done a different way. I really would encourage you to go back and take a look at this. This is a big issue. You won't be directly affected by it, but you will be with your customer base. And by the time we realize the damage that this type of a tax has done, we will have lost the industry as we've done with rail, steel, coal, and now General Electric locomotive division is now gone as well. We are a non-competitive state doing the things we're doing.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And again, depending upon your vantage point, I could see certainly the issues that you're bringing to bear.
You touched on, you said you have to readjust your bids to the PJM market.
Right.
If they start taxing that, what's that impact on you?
It all depends. Again, the question is does the cost of gas actually increase in the market as a result of the tax? And I mentioned the fact that, again, it's a broad market. Obviously, you have Ohio supplying gas. You have West Virginia supplying gas. Gas comes up from the Gulf right now as well. So, again, to the extent that the tax would come into the price of gas, we would increase our offers by virtue of whatever that increase would be. It's a cost component, and the way we develop our offers into the market is based upon our costs as well.
Right. But how does that make you competitive with other markets that are not in
Other
Pennsylvania.
generators that would not have that cost, obviously, it could shift a little bit of who's competitive versus who's not,
Right.
surrounding states. It is a broad regional market. Pennsylvania consumes power that's coming from Ohio, coming from New Jersey, just as Ohio and New Jersey consumes power coming out of Pennsylvania, right? So it's really all a question of, who's setting that marginal clearing price at that particular point in time. It could have an effect. Again, without really understanding if this will flow through, it's a little bit abstract to really take a hard and fast position on that right now.
Okay.
Thank you, Joe. I'm going to say something very simplistic, but I'll try and explain where I'm going. And the question I wrote down was, do you believe that people in Pennsylvania realize a lower cost of electric because we have a lower severance tax or / impact fee, whatever you want to call it?
I don't know if I can necessarily make that statement. Clearly, the consumers in Pennsylvania have a tremendous advantage with natural gas being in this state. The wholesale price of electricity right now, which correlates back to the retail price of electricity, couldn't be better. I mean, we are seeing historic lows in power pricing. Much of that is driven by gas and the efficiency of the new plants that are getting built. That's attracted, as I mentioned, $10 billion of investment. That's a huge number. But as it relates specifically to the severance tax, I don't know that I can
Okay.
wade into that at this particular point.
Let me see if I can
Sure.
explain, put the right words together to explain where my thoughts are on this. When you buy your natural gas,
Right.
maybe I've got it wrong. You can't say, like, I can drive my car up to a gas pump right here in Pennsylvania, and the taxes that are on that gas, I pay for it because I bought it right here in Pennsylvania. But if you were mixing all the gas together from Ohio, New Jersey, and all the other states and put it into that pump, you'd have a mixture of all those taxes.
Right.
An average of all those taxes, so to speak. So just because you're located in Pennsylvania, is your gas that you're buying necessarily coming out of that big pipe that's feeding your plant? Is that necessarily all Pennsylvania gas? And is there a mixture of other severance taxes from other states mixed into that you're actually paying for now?
As it relates to Calpine right now, I don't work on the gas procurement side, but my understanding is right now, most of our plants in PJM in the east, which is the Pennsylvania plants, and I believe the Delaware plants, are all pretty much running on Marcellus shale gas at this particular point in time. Now, the Utica shale gas is coming up, obviously, and there's more pipelines being developed and so forth, so that's going to be coming into the market as well. The West Virginia gas is coming into the market also. So, it's a broad market. You have the Gulf Coast gas coming up also. You're going to have a market price of gas, and that's why I keep getting back to the point. It's not clear to me, and I'm not an expert in terms of the overall gas market, but will a tax find its way into the commodity? Because, again, you have the other supply sources and so forth, or will this just be something that, again, raises, not that it's a good thing, mind you, I'm not taking a position on either way, but raises the cost of business for the producers. That's what's not clear to me at this particular point in time.
I was looking
Right.
at it from the other end. Sometimes I think I'm fighting both sides of a battle, but I was looking at it from the other end. Are the consumers, the end users, actually already paying for gas that has a higher severance tax in it because it's mixed together with other states? And it's just food
Yeah,
for
and,
thought.
I don't know very much about the severance tax in West Virginia, and I'm not going to hold myself as an expert either, but, I know Ohio has one. But when you look, as I understand it, without taking any position, we have the impact fees, and you got to look at it on an apples-to-apples comparison. So
Correct.
But I don't know enough about it to really give you a credible.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, actually, Representative Miles' question kind of leads into mine. On the PGM, which you sell to, when that electricity is being sold out of state, do those states actually, are they going to end up having to pay those gross receipts tax, or because are they being considered as being sold out of state?
Well, the gross receipts tax considerations, as I understand it, are really at the retail level. So it would be the retail, the business consumer, the industrial consumer, or the residential consumer in Pennsylvania that would pay that. So we sell into the wholesale market. When the power that we generate at a facility is going to the wholesale market, if it's going to New Jersey, there wouldn't be any gross receipts tax exposure for that. If there's a severance tax, and again, it finds its way in the price of gas, then, then they would pay a little bit more for that. But as it relates to the GRT, I don't believe that it would impact any of the surrounding states.
Thank you.
Since you seem to do some work on PJM, do you have any idea how the structure in this bill of a 5% transaction tax for your bids at PJM will affect prices to consumers, or how PJM will kind of administer that? Any conversation around that at all?
I mean, I know enough about that. As I understand it right now, the intention would be to sort of tax the virtual transactions, okay? The virtual transactions, it's PJM jargon, inks and decks and UTCs up to congestion, okay? So as I understand it right now, it would tax those particular commodities, which again are virtual, they're not necessarily physical. We have, again, you always look at this from your business interest standpoint, right? So we're not a very large player in the virtual transaction space, so I've not really focused on it that much. I don't know how PJM would administer it, should it actually become law, so to speak. I know that they would become as I understand it, they would collect the tax. There's a lot of regulatory things that they would have to go through to be able to do that. They are regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, so they'd have to make specific filings to be able to do all that. But I would really defer and to talk to PJM about that to get any more details.
Conceivably, they could eat the cost, or they could tack 5% onto the bids you submit on the virtual transaction?
I think
or?
anybody that's active in these markets, if there's a way to pass that through in your transactions, you're going to look to do that.
Okay.
And so, will it hit the consumer? It could. Like I said, it all depends upon how it actually gets put into the place and if there's the opportunity to pass them through. So, I mean, we're basically supplying a product, and we have a cost of doing business, and we flow that through in terms of what our offers are.
Yeah. Now, you have a national portfolio, California to
California,
Delaware.
Texas, New England, New York, PJM.
How are we, as far as a state, on competitiveness as cost of operation compared to the other states?
This is the only plant we're building right now is in Pennsylvania, so that probably speaks volumes. I mean, we like Pennsylvania a lot because it's a very good place to do business, and you can do business. Pennsylvania's embraced competition, non-discriminatory competition. Restructuring's been great for the state. Again, gas is here. It's a great place to do business, and it's translating back into low cost for consumers. So, but it's the only state that we're actually building a power plant right now, so that speaks volumes, I think.
Yeah.
As well as the other 7 that are getting built right now, so,
Yeah.
or 6, excuse me, including our one. So.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Any other questions? None. Thank you so much
Thank you.
for coming and testifying. Really
Thank you.
appreciate it. Next is Nate Benefield with the Commonwealth Foundation. Nate, come on up. I have these.
Yeah, I got new stuff.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you for having me. I'm going to be brief. I know that that's a virtue in these sorts of meetings. And just focus on 5 key numbers that we have in terms of analyzing the revenue plan passed by the Senate and some of the state spending numbers in this budget. The first number is $180 per family of 4. That's what the $600 million tax increase comes to when you're basically putting it on a per family level of what that impact is. Now that is already on top of our current tax burden, which is one of the highest in the nation. Tax Foundation ranks us 15th highest state and local tax burden. Wallet Hub looked at the burden on the median family with the median income, finds us the 11th highest tax burden. And these taxes, some of them are going to be on businesses that will be passed on to consumers through higher prices or lower wages. But a lot of them are going to be directly on families. And that's, as you're well aware, the gross receipts tax is going to be imposed on heating bills. About 2.7 million households use natural gas heat. We'll see an increase in their heating bills. Cell phone bills and electric bills are going to see higher taxes imposed. This is about as broad-based taxes you can impose. I know there's a push against doing broad-based taxes, but this affects almost every family in Pennsylvania, except for a few Amish families who don't have those costs. Second number to highlight is 3,600 lost jobs. We just did an analysis with the Beacon Hill Institute that does something called a stamp analysis and does economic modeling, basically the dynamic impact of imposing these tax increases. And putting it through their analysis found that next year there would be 3,600 fewer jobs in the private sector. There would be $142 million in lost investment in Pennsylvania, and $932 million less in disposable income, which comes to $54 per person, or about $216 less per family of four, both because of taxes and because of the economic impact of taxes on the economy. Third number I want to highlight is $2.9 billion spending increase. That's been the spending increase over the last 3 years under Governor Wolf. It's a higher spending increase in the general fund than in the prior 8 years combined. Now, as we all know, we ended last year with a $1.6 billion deficit. I said, why? Why is it? Is it because we undertaxed? No, it's because last year's spending increase, after all the supplementals were added in, was more than $1.8 billion. So you increase spending by $1.8 billion and you have a $1.6 billion deficit. I think that math is pretty clear, that our problem isn't that Pennsylvania families are taxed too little. It's that spending has been growing faster than our state economy. The fourth number I want to hit on, this kind of goes to what should we do instead, is $50 billion in spending in other funds. This is something that has not been talked about very much. We often focus on the $32 billion general fund budget. And ignore that we have an $80 billion total operating budget. That other $50 billion is in all these special funds, other funds, federal monies. And really, we should look at that number. Now, some of these funds are properly accounted for separately. When you have different insurance funds, workman's comp, those sort of things, it's absolutely appropriate for them to be separately accounted for in separate funds and distinct. But on the other hand, a number of them represent spending on projects that really could and should be brought back into the general fund and allow lawmakers to prioritize every year. We identified more than $3 billion in these special fund spending and tax credits. We call it the shadow budget because it's kind of behind the scene, behind the main budget, that really should be reprioritized. These include $250 million for horse racing subsidies, $95 million in the Keystone Parks and Recreation Fund, which, among other things, funds studies of feasibility of golf courses, and more than $1.8 billion in subsidies for mass transit. Because these funds are segregated and set aside as special funds, the legislature has not reconsidered over the last several years whether those funding levels are the right amount or whether they should be used for other purposes and other priorities. And that is something, I think, in terms of trying to balance the general fund budget, really looking at those other sources of funds and other funds and bringing them back into legislative consideration. And the last number I want to leave you with is 36. 36 college graduates leave Pennsylvania every day. The result of these tax increases and this tax burden is that Pennsylvania is continuing to lose residents to other states and has lagged the nation in economic growth. State revenues this year came in more than $1 billion under projections. Part of that is bad projections. We simply overestimated what revenues would be. But a large part of it is simply slow economic growth that we've had in the Commonwealth. To borrow from former President Bill Clinton's campaign, it's the economy, stupid. Unless we get the economy back on track, we are constantly going to have this problem of a structural deficit. Last year's tax increases are simply the latest example. Some people seem to forget that we raised taxes just 1 year ago. I should say we. The government, most of you I think voted no, but there was a $650 million tax increase imposed last year. One example, there was an onerous 40% wholesale tax on e-cigarette products. A year after this implementation, nearly 1/3 of the vape shops in Pennsylvania have closed down. About 100 vape shops have closed, laying off workers. over the last 25 years, Pennsylvania has ranked in the bottom 5 states in terms of population growth, job growth, and income growth. We lost population last year for the first time in more than 30 years, and driving this is the loss from state to state migration. We lost 45,000 residents total last year, and when we look at millennials, and the IFO did this analysis of college-educated millennials, finding that on net, we lost more than 13,000 millennials to other states in 2015, which is 36 college graduates leaving every year to find jobs in other states. So with that trend in mind, that the biggest priority in terms of solving our budget problem is how to grow the economy, how to grow, and focusing on economic growth and attracting jobs to Pennsylvania rather than driving them away. Our analysis shows that simply raising taxes is going to exacerbate the problems of our slow economic growth, and we should instead look to reform and control spending. And with that, I will open it up to questions and discussion.
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony. So you've dug into this a lot and saw what some of the ramifications are. One of them that we discovered yesterday was the Uber and Lyft fees that are going to go on that. So as you address millennials and their living and spending habits, they migrate towards that kind of mechanism. And you're looking at a $2 per ride tax, or I guess that's for over 4 hours, 25 cents. So that increase that's there. And what was even more shocking with that is so that's not going into our general fund. That fee's not helping our general fund. Right. That's going into mass transit. And so part of bringing the taxpayers here and listening to them today is that, I'm not sure what the number is, our rate of return, what we pay in taxes and what we get in services, but it's pretty low here in South Central Pennsylvania. And here yet again, where most of my constituents have to drive 7 miles just to access mass transit, a system that is much more amenable and accessible to them, like Uber or Lyft, they're gonna have to now pay additional fees for that service to subsidize something they don't have access to. Do you have any of those numbers of what the full, what the cascading effects of that's going to be?
I don't have any numbers on that right now. I will look into that and try and determine what the cost of those fees are. I think it has been unfortunate that much of our funding of mass transit, and we, Commonwealth should believe that you should pay for the government you use. And,
right.
But the problem with the way our transit is being funded is it is through these kinds of fees. In fact, the turnpike tolls are being redirected now entirely to mass transit. Driver fees are being used to fund mass transit. When the gas tax was increased, they redirected a lot of the fees to mass transit, and really so. In effect, you're charging drivers to pay for the transit they are choosing not to use, which is the worst way of governing. So
right. That was one of our biggest discovery. And in those ghost accounts that you're talking about, I think that's how they're circumventing this. So where mass transit used to be a big, a heavy, hot talking point in the budget, they've now evaded that by funding it through all of these ghost funds, which isn't on the table for discussion for the most part. Thank you.
Thanks.
Nate, thank you for being here today. So in our research and our work, we've discovered that there's over 218 special funds that create this, as you call it, shadow budget. How does Pennsylvania's budget look relative to other states? Have you looked at other states? Because we're constantly striving for transparency and accountability so that people can get a true picture of what it is that we actually spend. What are other states doing relative to Pennsylvania?
Yeah, we have done some look at that. It's been a little while, so I'm not as fresh on this, but other states do have special funds and keep things segregated, but most of them don't do it as much as Pennsylvania does. So it's not uncommon to have a separate lottery fund, have a separate fund for transportation, keep the gas tax separate. But the number of funds we have with 218 teen special funds that are off budget is unusual and much higher than what most states tend to do with that.
Do you have any recommendations for how to true up our budget process, how we can bring those funds back into the light of day for everyone to see, to be more accountable and open about how much we're actually spending and what we're appropriating money to?
Yeah, I do think that one, you can bring some of those funds back into the general fund and vote on them every year, rather than simply having them on autopilot, automatically getting a certain amount of the overall tax revenue. I certainly think we can do more to improve some of the transparency sites that are out there. I know that we have Penn Watch, which is useful to find some of that information of where the money goes. I think the site is not as user-friendly as I'd hoped it would be when it was first enacted. I think improving that to give taxpayers this kind of information, because it's simply the information is out there, but it isn't very well known that there are all these other funds and how much we're spending in those areas.
Thank you very much.
Nate, how are you today?
I am doing well.
Outstanding. Nate, Puerto Rico filed bankruptcy on May 3rd. Illinois is in extremely serious financial condition. How far is the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania from being in a situation where we are going the wayside of Illinois or Puerto Rico, or is that not a danger?
I mean, to guess exactly how far we are, we're not as bad as Illinois. That is, always the good news. When I give bad news, I say, we are not as bad as Illinois. But I do think we have a structural deficit. And I said, over the past year, 3 years, 10 years, you look at it, our spending has been growing faster than our state economy. That is simply unsustainable. Everyone would realize that if you keep on that pace, the government eventually becomes 100% of the economy, and 100% tax rates don't actually generate any revenue. We're at the same time we are seeing, we have seen our pension funds dramatically, the amount we owe dramatically increase both at the state level, and municipal pensions have grown. Our debt has grown as we've moved things, talk about the things we moved off to other funds. We've also been borrowing to fund things, and you like talk about the RCAP program, where we're borrowing money to fund sports stadiums and corporate headquarters, adding to the debt of taxpayers. The Turnpike Commission has added tremendous debt over the last few years, and is raising tolls again, I think, for the 10th year in a row there. Those are very concerns, and I think you're right to raise red flags about the possibility of becoming more like, moving towards Illinois. I think we're quite a few years away from being in an Illinois-type situation. I think they owe several years' worth of their general fund budget just in bills. But I do think that in the next decade or so we could be where Illinois is.
Nate, let me ask you, part of the package of bills the Senate sent over, obviously for general knowledge, you have the general appropriations bill, which is kind of locks in how much you're going to spend per department within what we appropriate. We usually have a fiscal code, which directs where that funding is in that budget. You can have an administrative code, which directs some stuff from the administrative end, human services code, education code, so forth. When I look at the fiscal code, there's language like no less than the amount used in 2014-15 fiscal year shall be used programs in a city of the second class, and no less than the amount used in the 2014-15 fiscal year shall be used for blueprint monitoring programs that address reducing youth violence in the cities of the first class, second class, and third class. At least $150,000 shall be used to support an engineering study related to infrastructure investment and marketing for an individual development area in the county of the sixth class with a population of at least 450,950, but no more than 6,500 under the most recent federal decennial census. What other fun stuff? $600,000 shall be used for a community development and remediation project in the city of the third class with a population greater than 6,800, less than 7,600 during the most recent federal decennial census. $2.2 million shall be used for the operation and maintenance of the Washington Crossing Historical Park. We actually know where that's at because it says it in there. No less than the amount allocated in 2014-15 fiscal year shall be allocated for an after-school learning program servicing low-income students located in a county of the 6th class with a population based on the most recent federal decennial census of at least 60,000, but no more than 70,000. 90,000 shall be distributed to a community college in the county of the 4th class with a population based on the most recent federal decennial census of at least 175,000, but not more than 190,000. 5,000 shall be distributed to a college established under Article XIXG of the Act March 10th, 1949, known as the Public Code of 1949. 350,000 shall be distributed for a county of the 6th class with a population of 75,000 to 85,000 under the most recent federal decennial census to establish a program that targets post-secondary students. Kind of goes on and on. I mean, I got 5 pages of those. So there would be earmarks on top of everything else that's directed to certain pots of entities. I know Congress had issues with earmarks. Supposedly, they've stopped the earmark program and directed funding. How many states do these kind of authorizations do we know of? And, you know, at a time when we're facing a $2 billion structural deficit, is it wise to do these dedicated fundings for certain areas of the state when we're talking about massive tax increases? I mean, could we not pull this stuff out instead of directing the funding there? Or open it up so everybody has an equal chance of getting after those dollars?
I do think, I mean, to your first question, I don't know the practice in other states. That is something I don't have any expertise on or haven't looked into it in the past. But it is very similar to what Congress had been doing, of earmarking funds. Part of the reason why it's so hard to decode them, and they're specifying, counties, by the size, is because it's technically illegal to just earmark money for a specific project. To say, so like, I'm giving it to my, favorite project in Allentown, that would be like, oh, that's, otherwise you have to make it open, so it has to be a city that is a population of 118 to 119,000 of the last census, which only applies to one city. But yes, it is, this is this redirection of funds and earmarking of funds basically takes away from actually the prioritization of what is most needed. That these are, the reason they're in the fiscal code is because these are political decisions that we're making, that we want to fund these projects. Maybe it's to get votes on these bills, but whatever reason, it's done by politics rather than by prioritizing actually what is the most important way. If we're spending, putting together $32 billion in the general fund budget, a lot of that to actually go to where it is most needed. These earmarks detract from that and really are simply picking and choosing some projects that, for whatever reason, have been politically chosen.
Has anybody done any kind of analysis to say what percentage of the overall budget goes to this? Because I'm seeing some of these funds, and while $750,000 may not be a lot of money in a $32.3 billion budget, but within a singular line item, might be significant. Has anybody, I haven't seen it to date, but how much work, like what percentage of the total budget and what percentage of those line items are directing to a certain entity versus kind of to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania?
Yeah, I don't have those numbers. I don't know that anybody else has them yet, but it would be something fairly easy to calculate based on the list.
Okay, thank you. Chris, do you have a question? Go ahead.
Yes, Nate, I want to thank you and the Commonwealth Foundation for the shadow budget programs brief you put on here. Of the 17 funds that you've identified, it amounts to $3 billion, or nearly 10% of the state budget. And the fact that these things are being determined by a bunch of bureaucrats with the money kept separately so that the legislature doesn't have any oversight of these programs and determining whether or not they are still necessary is disturbing. How many others, I mean, you gave us this is a nice synopsis of that $3 billion worth. Do you have any totals on how many of these things there are out there that, and possibly a gross number?
On the total?
Yes.
I mean, as Representative Hill represented, there are like 218 total funds. The amount of those, when you take out federal funds, is about $20 billion in all of those other funds.
And if you extract the ones that, like you said, that were necessary, that we do have to do the lottery fund for the aging and that sort of thing, how many of those, has anybody identified how many of those things actually operate as a shadow government rather than,
Yeah, I think, certainly there probably needs to be more analysis of those. Our analysis is basically taking some of the ones that clearly seem to us as simply funding projects that had in the past been part of the general fund and could very well be, there's no reason to have it be a separate fund outside of the general fund. And those should be priorities that are determined by the legislature every single year and not simply passed and put on autopilot for decades.
by a bunch of bureaucrats? I agree with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nate. Appreciate your testimony today. Next up, we have Barry and Judy Finnicle. Did I get that correct? Awesome. Thank you so much. And please come on up. And they're representing themselves as taxpayers of our great Commonwealth. Appreciate you taking time out today. And please start whenever you're ready.
I want to thank you very much for coming out into the real world and giving us an opportunity to express information about the House Bill 542. I'm going to come at it a little bit different angle, so you may want to put on some thinking caps of what I say. I do have testimony for you. By the way, Representative Don Kiefer has been doing a great job listening to constituents and addressing another catastrophe or potential disaster in the state of Pennsylvania, and that is increases in water and sewer rates that probably none of you are aware of. And all of your constituents will be affected by this process. Several of the Pennsylvania legislators, Congressman Scott Perry and others, Senator Pat Toomey and others, and even up to Vice President Mike Pence are interested in that subject. My wife Judy and I are retired. We're both on Social Security, and we get a big fat zero pay increase, okay? Now, we do have a small financial services business, primarily servicing clients that we've acquired over the past 20 years. We're actually at a break-even point for income. No, we're not one of the rich cats. Mainly due to increasing costs for licenses, regulations, and utilities. It never ends, okay? We have a very small office near Edders, about 2 miles from here. And again, costs are always going up, utilities. We don't have subsidies from anyone, no reduction in any utility cost. We don't have any lobbyists, excuse me. We don't have exemptions from fees and costs and their increases. We just have you, the legislators, to understand our plight and protect us. Now, I've talked to over 25 businesses here, just in our little tiny area here, including a restaurant right down the street here. I have George here today, the owner, great restaurant called the Hillside Cafe, just destroying his business with increased costs. When I went in to talk to him about the water rate increase, he about blew his mind. That's where he got some of his gray hair. Just staggering on businesses. A business right here, a stone's throw away, a restaurant and a comedy club. Said, what am I going to do? Charge my clients at a motel an extra $5 or $10 a month because they want to take a shower or a time for taking a shower? Now, on that subject, rates have been going to increase from 17% to 96%. That's for water, and anywhere from a special deal that they have here in New Cumberland of 2.5% to almost 60% for sewer rates. Talk about increase in cost. The businesses I talked to said they have three choices. They can eat some of the cost, which some of them probably will. Most of them said, I got to pass it on to the consumers. Another cost besides what we're talking about today. Some of them said, I'll go out of business. Now, as constituents, we don't have anybody to pass it on to. We got us, okay? We don't have a choice, we have to pay. That's in addition to the higher rates, fees, and costs all of us have to pay for school, property taxes, all the increases for goods and services, ever-increasing costs for licenses like driver's licenses and business licenses. I've heard that this increase to the utility bills would be approximately 15 cents per utility. It's a number I heard. Sounds like a small amount, but we know that's just a start. Fees would probably creep up as more and more revenue is needed. When you multiply that 15 cents to all utilities, then becomes a little bit more, doesn't it? Now, the increased costs of any kind do not take into account what we refer to as a realistic cumulative impact, RCI, realistic cumulative impact. Simply put, the RCI is any additional cost to businesses being passed along to their customers, like restaurants, grocery stores, doctors, dentists, car dealers, car shops, repair shops, pizza shops. So small taxes and service increases become multiplied many times. It's not just 15 cents here, it's 15 cents passed on by what businesses have to do. There's an elderly lady who lives near here, wrote me, said on the water issue, said most of them were on the wells and township made them go on to public water and sewer. Cost them over $4,000, which they didn't have to go into that cost. So that's a cost they didn't have. She said, where does it end with these utility companies? Working just to survive. She said it gets very depressing. Obviously it does. Another local lady said that they had to install a sewer line. Cost them $4,000 that they didn't have. Again, $1,500 to get the grass replanted. All these mandated costs add up, especially when you don't get an increase in your income. So 15 cents sounds like a lot or a little, but it adds up with all the other costs that you have. When you look at our utility bills, personally here, have Pennsylvania American Water Company have a state tax adjustment surcharge, distribution system improvement charge, customer protection for the water line, customer protection for the sewer line. We have Xfinity for television and phone. Universal connective charge, regulatory recovery fee, broadcast TV fee, and for phone, the franchise fee, sales tax, regulatory fee, a state sales tax, a 911 fee, more sales taxes. We have Frontier Communications that are a business. They have an access recovery charge. I'm not sure even what that is. Federal subscriber line charge, state gross receipts tax, Pennsylvania state telecom sales tax, state telecom relay service, Pennsylvania state 911 surcharge, PA state gross receipts tax, on and on and on, which you folks know about. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but you know it needs to be done. We look at gas taxes. In your packet, you'll see a map, and Pennsylvania's #1. Not a good thing. We're the highest state in gas taxes, 58.2 cents per gallon for gasoline. Let me give you some facts that prove that we don't need additional taxes. Inflation in the last 30 years has increased by 77.2%, or an average of about 2.5% a year. Social Security increases have averaged about 1.69% over the last 10 years, and only 2.6% in the last 30 years. Remember, 0% in the last 3 years, okay? School taxes have gone up approximately 4% a year, in spite of Act 1 of 2006 to control taxes. Those lovely things called loopholes. We're getting them every year, things are going up. Our water rates for Pennsylvania American Water have increased 350% in the last 30 years. You will not find anything in the world that is going up more by research, 350%. How can Pennsylvania close the budget shortfall? I have some suggestions. First of all, look at the funds that are available. Then do the spending plan. Stop the ass-backward process of establishing spending amounts and try to develop a plan to fund it. If you want to gain about $300 million a year, reduce the 500 school districts to 67. How many counties are in Pennsylvania? 67. Eliminate school taxes for those over 60 years old. I want to throw that in. You need to look harder, as the gentleman from the Commonwealth Foundation said, look harder at the needless programs and eliminate their waste. We hope that you'll listen to the constituents. They just may save your seat in a couple ways. How did some of the Republican senators become liberal tax and spenders? I can't figure it out. Vote against any more taxes and cut spending. Thank you.
Just a personal comment. I just love your testimony.
Yes.
Do you have any questions before she starts? Okay.
Okay, I'm going to be sort of reiterating a little bit of what Barry said, but I was born in Pennsylvania. My parents moved away from Pennsylvania when I was 5 years old. However, as a young adult in 1969, I moved back to Pennsylvania, to central Pennsylvania. And I have lived here ever since. And my first experience with the legislation issue in Pennsylvania was the primary election in 1970, I believe it was, when Senator Wade was voted back into office. However, Senator Wade had passed away prior to the election. And I thought, you know, what's going on? My point is, I think that the citizens of Pennsylvania have since waken up, and we have some very good people in the legislation right now, and I honestly believe that they are working for the people. And I'm here today just to kind of talk about, from a consumer standpoint. I have always been in charge of the family budget. The first thing that I do when I sit down with the family budget is I look at how much we have coming in with income. What is our Social Security? What is our pensions? What do we make with the business? And from there, we have fixed cost that we can count on month to month to month. And then we have the other costs, like your groceries, your gasoline, your entertainment, things that we have some control over. And I'm finding that through the years, it's getting harder and harder, and the additional income or the additional expenses that we have are actually, we're reducing them. And, you know, we don't have as much to spend anymore. And so our fixed costs, they keep going up. So it's really a very hard budgeting act trying to get this all worked out. But my point is, why doesn't our government do the same thing? They know what the fixed cost is. They know what we as citizens can afford. They should know that. If they don't, then they don't belong in office. And they keep imposing these taxes on us as a fix for their inept abilities. And frankly, I think I speak for all citizens, we're a little tired of it. There are people that are in a lot worse shape than we are right now. They can't even go to the grocery store and buy enough meal or meat or groceries for the week. So just, I think that any new taxes that are put on us as a consumer are going to be very detrimental, not only to families, but also to our businesses. And I feel that we have no other recourse except through you, and I thank you very much for putting together this caucus so that we have a voice. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you both for being engaged, because I appreciate the time you've come into my office to talk to me, and that's one of my concerns I have, is that the lack of engagement across the board, people that just are not engaged in the process. And so I think that's why you've gotten a lot of what you've gotten. And it's really since the whole big pay raise thing, where it seems that a lot more Pennsylvanians are engaged in the process. One of your comments was, don't they know what their costs are already? Well, we do know what our costs are, but it varies across the Commonwealth of what people think our costs should be. Should we fund this? Should we fund this grant? Should we pay the leases for community colleges? Should we borrow money to give grants to the arts? I mean, it's a very wide breadth of what people believe our funding, what our nut is to cover, and that's what we've got away from. I do appreciate what you're saying. I say the same thing. When I'm looking at my budget, I know I've got to cover my mortgage. If I can't cover my mortgage, I don't do cable, right? That's a luxury at that point. What the problem is with the Commonwealth, it seems that what should be luxuries are now what they're saying are got to be the base now. So we are looking at that to cut all of that back to, a haircut across the board. We're not targeting anything specifically. We're targeting it all, right? Let's start reining this back in. It should not be increasing beyond the rate of inflation. It's an absolute spending problem that we have on here. A lot of what you said is stop it with your common sense. It does not apply to government. It just does not. I mean, I have looked at things, and this past week, just going through a whole analysis of the bills that were proposed, as well as our budget process, has just been shocking, absolutely shocking. So we do hear you, and we are working on that. You said 350% increase in water over 30 years. That hasn't been annually, though, correct? Those have been like every 10 years. Is that
Well,
what
it's
you're looking at that?
Yeah, it's averaged 10% a year, which is nothing else that is.
That increases
approaching,
at that rate.
And it doesn't stop. As I said, the new increases now are anywhere from 17% to 96%.
Depending where you live.
Increases. What will that do to businesses? And, I talked to a car wash right down the street. The guy says, hey, raise any more taxes. This is going to be a parking lot. He says, I already recycled my water. What am I going to do?
Right. We have a couple business owners here from the area, same issues. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Representative Grove, and thank you to Barry and Judy for joining us today. I feel like I could pull any, married couple from my district and put them here, and they would probably say the same thing. Mm-hmm. And I hear that time and time again. I've held a couple of events over the past couple of weeks, and my constituents always look at me and say, well, if you're going to tax, at the end of the day, I'm probably going to have to figure out how to cut in my budget. So why can't you at the state figure out how to cut in yours? And I know I can echo some of my colleagues over the past couple of weeks. We've taken a hard look at some of these special funds, and the money out there is just unbelievable. It would kind of be like you guys finding a savings account out there that you didn't know existed. And wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Wouldn't that be fun? And so that's where I think, what this group up here is looking at really trying to find those cost-saving measures. So know that we are trying to do that, and we do come from the common sense mold of legislators. I know that word doesn't really exist, but in my office, I learned from my mother. We cut coupons for toilet paper and paper towels and things like that. That's what we do, because you guys do that at home, right?
Yes.
Right.
Judy, you cut
Absolutely.
coupons every day?
Oh, yes.
Because that's the only way to do it, right? So, and I look at you two, you're, getting ready to probably retire. You have this financial services business. and I look at, myself, I'm a millennial here in Pennsylvania. I'm one who chose to stay here. I guess Nate from the Commonwealth Foundation said that 36 of us leave every single day. And I can name 10 of my friends who have left here in the past 6 months. So, when you guys are looking at retiring here and selling the business, are you guys looking at selling the business? Can you sell the business? Can you pass it on to anyone? And really, is there an environment here in Pennsylvania where you can get that return on that business investment? And are you going to stay here after you retire? Are you going to continue to be Pennsylvanians? And if not, how can we create a state to make sure that people like you stay here and contribute to our communities?
Well, the way our business is structured, we can sell it at a certain level. We're not at that level, though, to sell it. We love what we're doing. When we get people paid off their house and have a mortgage burning party, or get their kids to college, and all that's why we're in the business. We're not in it. Some of the people in our company make substantial income, but we're in it to help the people and love the people, because again, irregardless of what the federal government says, all financial advisors are not crooks. and you look at yourself of where we've come from and want to help other people and have a tool to do that and make significant income, make millionaires out of some of the people, and millennials especially, make them retire, that they're able to have $3 or $4 million in a retirement plan. I mean, it's satisfaction for that. I've lived here all my life. I lived within 20 miles of here all my life in Pennsylvania. But to tell you the truth, we've been talking about moving to Delaware, where there isn't any income taxes and no sales tax and things like that. Our friends and family are here. We'd hate to do that, but we think that we have a chance now, I think, to change things. We see, as Judy said, there's a tremendous amount more common sense people in the legislature than there ever has before. I've been working with the legislature since I was 18 years old in different roles, and I think there's a possibility now for real change, as people are getting more and more sick of the same old thing. We've got to change things. They've got you by the short hairs. You got to change things. You got to fight.
Thank you, Barry, and we're going to continue to fight for you in the Taxpayer Caucus.
Thank you, guys. It's a wonderful testimony. I really like to hear non-professionals speak that don't speak in front of us on a constant basis. It sure is a breath of fresh air. And you're absolutely 100% correct. There is a growing number of us in the legislature that definitely has your best interest at heart and are extremely conservative with the way we want to spend our money. Now, we're trying to bring Seth around. He's getting there. But let me just tell you, give you an idea of what happened, and this is for most people in the audience probably already know this. Many years ago, back under the Ridge administration, money was flush. It was everywhere. Okay? They had to look for ways to spend it, which in itself was absolutely a horrible thing. It's still taxpayers' money. Maybe you reduce taxes when you have situations, or build a really nice rainy day fund, so when you have, and then another governor raided that rainy day fund later. But they got into some really bad habits. Some of our leaders, I'll say on the other side of the building from us, not necessarily the other side of the aisle, on the other side of the building, and some in our caucus as well, got into some really bad habits of, we need to spend. Oh, we got a pet project, let's put money in it. Oh, we'll write this into the admin code or the fiscal code, and we'll just direct money over here. Nobody will know, nobody will read it, nobody will watch. Well, as you can see, we're reading it and we're watching it now. There is a growing number of us that do have your best interest at heart. Us rank and file members are no longer going to sit back unheard. I can assure you of that. And the days of spending money before we make money, I think, are now at an end with what just went on in this recent budget cycle and what we're going through now trying to fill this gap. I'm pretty well rest assured that that this is not going to go forward in this manner again. Just to give you an idea how hard it is, though, how difficult it is for change. We put Seth Grove's welfare reform into my welfare code bill to pass it out of the House over to the Senate, which we did. And it was the welfare to work and policy premiums for those who had children in the medical assistance, Medicaid, that we were paying for 100%, but the sliding scale started at 1,000% above the federal poverty level. Just to bring it into terms that you'll understand, it started at $246,000 a year income. You would have to pay $53 a month toward your own child's health care. Now, if you're making $250,000 a year, I would certainly think $53 a month is quite reasonable. I had to fight that bill on the House floor for roughly 2 to 2.5 hours, and when it passed with 102 votes out of 203. If we had one less vote, it would not have passed. That gives you an idea. You and I and most of the people in this audience can sit here and say, well, that's just about as common sense as it gets. And if you're able to work, why wouldn't you be asked to work in order to be on benefits if you're able to work? It's common sense. We passed it by one vote. Just to give you an idea how hard change comes about in Harrisburg. I'm sure it's the same in DC, but there is a growing number of us that do have your back. So thank you for being here.
We can see that with about 15 seconds talking to Representative Teeter.
Barry and Judy, thank you very much. And like Representative Klunk, who said she's a millennial, I am as well. It's a different millennial. It's the only difference. She's second millennial. I'm first millennial. It's Latin was my birth language. But I wanted to mention something. And Barry, you said something that really struck a nerve, and your testimony was absolutely superior. But I want to ask you a huge favor, if you don't mind. My entire career, I went in the legislature at age 66. And so obviously I'm a freshman. We're having a kegger after this meeting, so we'll be good. But I mentioned that, though, for this reason, is that my whole career has been spent trying to keep companies out of bankruptcy. I'm a CPA. I believe the Commonwealth has got 2 to 4 years before we have to turn the financial ship, and if we don't, the game's over. The tax changes we would have to do would be so unpalatable to everyone, we'd have a riot. We're not going bankrupt in 2 to 4 years, and Nate, you answered that question brilliantly. I've calculated the number to be about 12 years from now, which we are in the state of Illinois is. But you made a comment about for people over age 60, and as you can tell by looking at me, I are one. I'm going to ask you and me and others our age to talk to younger people, because if you don't think they're not getting nailed by this government, you're wrong. I mean, I can tell you, when we had children in daycare, it might have been $150 a week. My daughter's got 3 children in New Cumberland. It's $28,000 a year. When you talk about situations about we're not paying, we don't have children in school anymore. I went back and looked at when my children were in grade school and multiplied it by the cost per child. And to this date, I have not paid enough taxes in to cover the amount that my children cost. We have been lying to us about the cost of education in the sense that we're not funding our pension obligations. So the cost that we thought we were incurring during the ridge years got passed on to future generations, and they're sitting behind you. Younger people are leaving because we've given no other option. We're staying because we have no other choice. And we have to stop that. This problem in this Commonwealth is a spending crisis. Just in literally with the group of the work that was done here, we identified $370 million. We've got a reverse spending allocation that's being done, $370 million to drop spending. All of us identify a budget first. we say what we can afford to pay, and then we do it. Many of the people sitting here voted against the budget. And this tax plan, I can't speak for everybody else, but I know I intend to vote against the 542. But I do have to tell you, talk to the younger people. They're struggling. I mean, they're paying our health bill. I mean, I get to, there's no other way you can look at it. When their premiums, and you can say, well, wait, they're not paying yours, and I don't mean yours specifically, but those of us our age that are on Medicare or Medicaid, we're only paying a fraction of the cost, and younger people are seeing it go up in their premiums, because if the payer mix for a hospital gets out of control, it's a disaster. You two are so eloquent. I would really encourage you to talk to younger people. And what's happened, and the reason we're losing this battle, is because they, and I don't know who the they is, have successfully divided the younger and the older people, and you're not coming at us as a united front. You got a lot of young people behind you. Now, compared to me, you're all younger, but I'm talking about Judy and Barry. But talk to them and see what they're going through, because it's pure hell for a young family. When I was raising my children, my wife could stay home and take care of the kids. Nobody I know can afford to do that in this day and age. We've got to understand it, because if we don't provide relief for all of us, and that means downsize our government. This is the only government I know, the only place I know where you can still get a defined benefit pension plan is government. Employers stopped that 20 to 30 years ago. Health insurance plans that would choke a horse, I don't know if, I never had one, even in the Marine Corps, I never had a health insurance plan like that. We've got to look at these things entirely differently. You two are so eloquent. I'd love to, I'm going to stay with Dan Mull said. I'd love to have you both come up. I wouldn't want to irritate you, by the way, but I would want you both to come up, because I got a feeling you could let me know it if I screw up. But I promise you I won't. But thank you.
Well, one of the things, Representative, with the education system, with the young people, they are not being taught finances, period. One thing that a millennial can become a multi-million, all of you, I'm older than all of you. One thing, if they teach them just one tiny principle of finances, is the rule of 72. And I'm not going to put you on the spot, but the rule of 72 says you divide the interest rate that you're getting on your savings account, 401k, into the number 72. That tells you how many years it will take for that money to double. So if you're getting 12% in the 72, 6 years your money, nobody, that's like walking, that's like breathing. They should be, they're not taught in school. They're not taught that the government should live within their means. It's gimme, gimme, gimme is what they're taught. So there's one of the things we're bucking against. We do talk to a lot of young people, a lot of young couples, and we've been in the business for 20 years, and man, you see some of the people are very happy with what we've, just common sense stuff that we didn't know, that once we learned, we taught other people. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Barry and Judy. Just real quick, you own a financial advisory business. So on a day-to-day level, you get to see the finances of your fellow citizens, whether a person and an individual. At an aggregate level, what are you seeing as cost increases for the individual family, and how much harder do you have to work now as opposed to when you started to bring people into financial freedom? Even though I don't think you'll ever really hit financial freedom, but I mean paying off your mortgage and trying to alleviate yourself of debt. How harder is it today than it was when you started?
Well, it's a lot harder because families today have a tendency to try to borrow from credit cards and home equity lines of credit, and then they have trouble paying it off because, you know, one little emergency comes up and then they're stuck. So it's critical that we help those families teach them how to manage that, the principles of getting out of debt and things like that. It's very hard today. The banks and the taxes, they don't help. Sometimes they make things worse. The mortgage industry, they've made it worse for families. They changed the rules about 6 years ago, And they basically took that part of our business away from us, where we could help a family get out of debt by having a simple interest mortgage, paying it biweekly, and take a 30-year mortgage and have it paid off in 15 years, just by adding a little bit extra each biweekly period. You can't do that anymore. The banks charge you to do that. The banks don't apply the interest and the payment until the 28th of the month, even though you may have paid it on the 1st. But when they changed the laws, that part of our business went away. So, yeah, it's a lot harder today. And Barry and I are kind of semi-retired. We have a lot of families and small businesses that we take care of, and we're not really looking to build anymore. We're not young enough. You know, if we were 30 years younger, yeah, we'd be doing it, but we're not. We're just maintaining right now.
And I think your testimony needs to continue to resonate in Harrisburg, how the compounding effect of everything adds up, where it's $10 here, $10 here, $10 here, $10 here, $10 here. Soon it's $100 a month, every month, and it just keeps pulling money out of the economy that you could use to invest in your retirement, child's education, you name it. The potential there is it's coming to government at some point. So I really appreciate it. I think that testimony in itself, while it's not specific on the bill, helps us gauge where the individual taxpayers are in our Commonwealth and help us make better decisions moving forward on your behalf. So thank you very much, both for your time today and your
If there's
testimony.
anything that we can do, please let us know, because we're available.
Call your state rep. No. Yeah. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Next up is Warren Billette. Mr. Billette. Thank you so much. Warren, whenever you're ready, sir, go ahead.
I want to thank you all for serving on the Taxpayers Caucus. And the next thing I want to thank you for is the $3 billion sheet you put together on how we could save $3 billion. You know, it's really a shame that there aren't more of those ideas in a bill. But I want to thank you, Dan, for this welfare. That's beautiful. We've got a problem in this country, and I blame it on the welfare system. I tutor in public schools, second grade reading. And I want to tell you, it's discouraging to see fourth generation kids on welfare. It's unbelievable. This is going to be the ruination of this republic, because we're going to come to the point where the taxpayers are going to say, I'm finished paying. So what are we going to do then? I'm here to tell you flat out, no tax increases. I'm here to promote a reduction in corporate taxes, business taxes. I come from a background of, believe it or not, growing up through the Depression. And back in those days, we had to make things do. As a little kid, I used to raise vegetables and take them around the neighborhood to sell them. My first paycheck was in 1940. And guess what? 0 deductions. 0 deductions. Now, we obviously have a lot of service now that we didn't have then. But my background is with a Fortune 500 company, and I don't want to blow my job out of proportion. I was not the CEO, okay? But I was the analyst who was feeding the CEO information on where we should locate our new plants. Now, what did we look at? Well, the first question we asked was, is this a right-to-work state that we want to move to? This is vitally important if we're ever going to change the economy in Pennsylvania. You got to get rid of the union requirement that everybody belongs. As a kid going through college, I had to join a union, and believe me, it really ticked me off because I need every buck I could get to get back to school. So that's number one. We've got to make this a right-to-work state. Number two, we've got to cut that corporate net income tax and fix the carry-forward problem. Business is the only thing on the horizon that's going to help us get out of our declining economy. Now, I remember when Pennsylvania was an economic powerhouse in the United States. Every other state looked to the Pennsylvania to say, hey, this is great. How do you guys do this? Well, how do we do it? We attracted business. I worked in Pittsburgh for 30 years. At one time, we had more 500 corporate offices than New York City. Now look at it. Our population is going down because young people are not going to stay in a stagnant economy, and they aren't going to pay these taxes that Representative Ryan was talking about. They just can't afford it. They got to move out. So what we're doing is we're getting a bunch of old geezers like me. And you don't want that. You want young people that are vibrant. You don't want these old complainers, okay? You don't want them. Now the next thing we got to do is get rid of this prevailing wage. Oh, that is that's an atrocity. That is easily increasing our school taxes by a good 20%. Because you got all these schools that are expanding. You got to get rid of prevailing wage. I just want to give you one statistic, and that is, I just got from a tax foundation, which I've been supporting for I don't know how long, but they put out the 2017 data. And do you... and believe me, I don't mean to preach to the choir because I know all you people share my view. It's a darn shame that we can't get the Democrats in here. And that was my first question to Kristen. How many Democrats are here today? But this statistic is one I want you all to remember and tell your colleagues. Pennsylvania is 6th from the bottom in being business friendly with taxes. 6th from the bottom. Not the top, the bottom. We are 44th. as I say, I know all you folks realize the importance of attracting business to Pennsylvania. And believe me, it's the only salvation. Because you got this older group of people that are costing you big money. And so you've got to get business in here. You've got to get good paying jobs, or we're never going to close that gap. We're just going to keep on raising taxes. And that's unsustainable. I'd just like to say, if I have time, do you want? Okay. We've got to start educating these young people in addition to finance. We've got to start educating them on what made this country great. We are an exceptional republic. Okay? And these kids don't know the Declaration of Independence. They don't know the Constitution. They don't know the Founding Fathers' principles, which have to be passed on from one generation to another, or this republic is going to fail. And you can see that even the people we have down in Washington don't understand these principles. They don't understand it. So it's something that we've got to do here in the state of Pennsylvania. We've got to require all high school graduates to complete a satisfactory one-semester course on the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution so that they know what their rights are. That's important, in addition to teaching them finance. And I'd just like to close with one other perspective. By the way, I don't think I finished that story about my career trying to decide where we're going to put new plants. Well, I never was turned down, and so guess what? We didn't put one plant in Pennsylvania. They're all down in Alabama, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and if you could possibly take the time, look at how those states' economies are growing and how people are moving into them. That's the key, business. One last comment. I volunteer for SCORE. I don't know if you know what SCORE is. But I want to tell you, if you increase any more taxes, most of our clients are really going to hurt. They're in competitive businesses like restaurants, babysitting, lawn care, that kind of thing. We very rarely have somebody come in that's in a technology business. Okay? So I just end up with no tax increase, a cut in the corporate income tax, passing right to work, passing prevailing wage, and you'll be surprised how things turn around. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
I think we're going to try to get back on schedule, so we're going to pass on questions, Warren, but thank you so much for your testimony.
Thank you
Really
for
appreciate
giving me the
it.
opportunity.
Yep. Next up is Ann Druck, Executive Director of the York County Visitors. It's Visitors and Convention Bureau? CVBD? Convention and Visitors Bureau. I knew I had it. I'm kind of right. Yeah. A picnic basket. Thank you. Anytime you're ready, Ann, please.
Mr. Blewett was a great setup because business is certainly all of what we're about in tourism, and throughout the state, small businesses, as you know, are impacted by that. And I'm very fortunate that my colleagues and I can see that, whether it's Laura in Lebanon or John in Jefferson or Norris in Adams County. Small businesses really drive tourism. And there's a small business in the Fight in 93rd, and it's called Brown's Orchards. And it's an excellent place, and they thrive on tourism. And locals and visitors alike happen to love their pies. So we brought some pies for you today. And these pies have a story because pies and tourism have something in common. Happens to be cherry, my favorite. So pies have 3 key ingredients, and that is the crust and the filling, and since it's summer, the fresh fruit. Tourism has 3 key components, and that is revenues, jobs, and taxes. So what I'd like to do today with you is get into this pie, and we're going to show, Seth, Representative Grove, you talked earlier about competitiveness with other states. So we are going to demonstrate with this pie how Pennsylvania is not competitive with other states when it comes to tourism, and in fact how we're losing market share. So I'll just get out of my basket here some of our competitive states. New York, I know you know their brand, which is I Love New York. This knife represents 70 million annually that New York is representing, is investing in their state tourism office. Look at that. That cuts the whole piece of pie there. Isn't that nice? I'm not going to get it out because I don't want to make it messy for the next person, but that's New York, 70 million. Michigan, I know you know what their brand is. Yes, Pure Michigan. Michigan comes in at 34 million annually that they're investing in their state tourism promotion. Another big piece can be cut with that. Virginia, another Commonwealth. I know you know what their brand is. For lovers, yeah. I have my oh yeah, no, you're on the House Tourism Committee, So Virginia, no, I appreciate it, Representative Mao. 20 million is spent annually. So now let's get to the state of Pennsylvania and our amazing Keystone State. How much are we investing annually in tourism? Well, yeah, don't give that away yet. He's my ringer. If you look at Pennsylvania's, the budget, the line item in the budget, it says 12 million, not a first scale, but 12 million. However, that number is very deceiving because, as was mentioned earlier, those special projects and those earmarks, or Representative Grove, I've heard you say the W word before, the majority of that 12 million is in those special projects and earmarks. And Representative Phillips Hill's on my board of directors, and we agree that those projects are very important and they're great projects, but they're not funding statewide promotion, and they're not competing against the New Yorks of the world and the Michigans of the world and the Virginias of the world. So we need to keep that amount pure, because what it winds up being is $4 million. So this is what we have to compete against other states, and we're getting a couple crumbs off there for Pennsylvania. So my request to you is that together we need to fight for Pennsylvania's fair share of the tourism industry, and we're competing. So we rely on your leadership. We have relied on it, and we rely on it once again to fix the flawed way that we are funding Pennsylvania's tourism office. Thank you very much. Yeah, please, yes, please do. I have forks over there.
So, Representative Ryan, you will never be disappointed with a Brown's pie. That is for certain. And thank you for coming today, and probably for the most innovative testimony I have ever heard in my short but eventful tenure in the legislature. So we see this in several different sections of our budget. I chair the Cystic Fibrosis Caucus. money that goes to cystic fibrosis takes care of these specialized treatment centers so that people with CF don't have to take off multiple days of work. They can go to one place. And when money is put into special projects, a hospital in a second-class county, in a, and on and on and on, it means that money that can be fairly and equitably distributed isn't being fairly and equitably distributed. By funding these special projects, we're picking winners and losers. And essentially, you're saying the same thing is happening with tourism.
Absolutely. And in tourism, Michigan, the state of Michigan has done research. The gentleman before me spoke so eloquently about business is the answer. They have proof that the investment they've made in tourism has what they call a halo effect, and it gives potential visitors a higher impression of your community as a place to work and live. So this can also help us, not with the direct impact of tourism, which is huge, $40 billion a year, but it can also help our state to be seen as a business-friendly climate and a place where these millennials from other states can move to.
You are involved with the statewide advocacy organization for convention and visitors bureaus for tourism. Do you speak on behalf of that statewide organization in saying that you do not support these individualized projects, but support funding tourism as a whole to bring people to the Keystone State, not to specific locations?
Absolutely. We're a member of the Pennsylvania Restaurant and Lodging Association, and I happen to be chair of basically the Convention and Visitors Bureau Committee, or the Destination Marketing Committee. And I have Mary Yoder here with me. She's the Government Relations Specialist from PRLA, and Laura Guerreri is our Director of Sales at the York County CVB, and I've been in this job for almost 25 years. If I can't speak for my industry, I need to find another industry. But yes, my colleagues would say we are not doing the right thing by taking these earmarks out of the line item for our state budget. We see those ads for Pure Michigan. We hear the ads for Maine, of all places. I mean, come on, we are rich in product here. And other communities are eating our lunch. So it needs to be fixed. I don't know how you deal with the myriad and multitude of range of projects you have to deal with, but I know you can do it.
And just as a last question, thank you for the latitude, Representative Grove, but we have a designated revenue stream to build projects like that in each county. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that's right. The legislature passed House Bill 794 that Representative Keith Gillespie sponsored, and many of you helped him to get 60 signatures to get it through the House. Went through the Senate with the help of Senator Wagner, back to the House, and then Governor Wolf signed it. So that bill, or Act 18, if all 57 counties would impose it, it would be an additional $26 million a year. So far, 30 of the 57 counties have increased their tax from 3% to 5%. That's huge in your local community, but it still doesn't combat the fact that other states are eating our economic lunch when it comes to tourism, because we're underfunding our state tourism office.
Keystone Games happening in York currently, correct?
Yes.
Do we get any state assistance for that? That's
No.
all local?
All local.
Marketing to attract tourists, that's the line item we're talking about,
Correct.
correct? Apparently in the fiscal code, there's $500,000 for an annual statewide competition serving approximately 2,000 athletes with intellectual disabilities from across the Commonwealth to be held in a county of the 4th class. That's a dedicated stream out of that line item. Where does that put every other county that is not that county when they get that kind of direct funding injected into them?
That's tough. I would love to know. It's interesting. The one line item that you read, you said, "Oh, we know what that was." I'd love to know what that is. I don't. I probably should off the top of my head. But Laura, when we were on the drive up here, we're competing with 3 other destinations to hold a huge event that would bring economic impact. So tourism is very competitive. It's competitive state by state and county by county. But that may be a worthy project, but it should not take away, which is what it's doing, from our overall state tourism effort competing against other states.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny, in the document I have, it's $4 million to fund the activities of the tourism fund within the department. So the $4 million is spread across. We know $500,000 dedicated to this one county of the 4th class, which there's actually multiple counties, and then the rest is even divvied out even more outside of that.
Right.
So, you know, we have an accounting of $4.5 million out of $12 million. You know,
And we're fighting against 70 and 35 and 20.
Yeah. Any other questions? Ladies, age or beauty before age.
And thank you so much for joining us today. And I sit on York County's hotel tax grant committee, and seeing the economic impact of $1 that is infused into tourism, and then the economic benefits of that. Can you speak to that so that, you know, legislators that aren't on the tourism committee can really understand, and that goes into the record, to really understand, for every dollar that we invest in a statewide marketing campaign, how much money that could come back to our local communities, that are our hotels, the Brown's Orchard, people buying pies, you know, going out and participating at a recreational event or going to a concert, a sports event. How much money does that return on the investment give us?
The Pennsylvania Restaurant and Lodging Association invested in a research study. For every dollar that's spent on tourism, it's a 300% increase in return on investment. So that is huge. And even in York County, our budget is a little over $2 million a year, and we're leveraging almost $1 billion in tourism expenditures. So that is a great point, Representative Klunk, that it's an investment in tourism, because it's going to yield those much needed revenues to balance the budget. And you know, we're competing against other states, so their businesses are thriving. They're going to suck more people out of our community, suck more millennials out of our state.
Thanks, Ann. I appreciate your testimony, and that was great. Just so everyone knows, and I've been such an advocate for tourism dollars and not raiding the tourism funds, tourism in Pennsylvania is our second largest industry next to agriculture. And yet we fund it at $4 million a year, which to me is just ridiculous. But just for fun, the one question you didn't ask my colleagues up here is, what is Pennsylvania's current slogan?
You know, I think it's a wonderful slogan, and the problem is that it doesn't have the funds behind it to make it memorable like the others.
I'm just curious to see if they knew.
I thought it's Taxylvania.
It's Pursue Your Happiness.
Pursue Your
And
Happiness.
I think it's a great brand. I could get behind it, but it's not going to make a drop in the bucket without legitimate marketing power behind it. You know, everybody knows Coke, but you see those ads every day.
All right, well, short.
It'll be very short. Actually, you mentioned John straight
Yes.
up, and also Black's Pie. Or I just wanted to put in a little plug for Plyler's Pies up in Plyler's Family Restaurant.
Love to try them.
Just down the street from John's office.
Awesome. A lot of small businesses
And the
benefit.
Pennsylvania Great Outdoors.
That's great.
We'll have
Thank
a
you very
competition.
much. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Ann.
We'll leave the pies over here.
do.
We have
Thank
to
you so
scoot.
much.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Next is Mr. Tom.
While this lady's here.
Well, we have a bunch of
Just for a
other,
minute, then I'll leave.
I'm sorry, we got a bunch of other testifiers that on the list.
Brown's Orchard, I was to one of her meetings and whatever, they would not support me, and you're bringing their pies in, and I can't get $1 from you. I thank you all, and I called the state, a whole bunch of phone numbers. I wanted to do the marijuana thing. I got no cooperation on any of the phone numbers in the Department of Health in Harrisburg, and she had meetings somewhere, and I went to them.
Thank you, sir. Sir, we're not here to discuss that. Thank you, appreciate it. Next testifier is Tom Ryan. Thank you so much, Tom, for coming in today.
Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for all of your efforts.
You just make sure the mic's in front of you and that green button's on.
Okay. There we go.
Perfect. Thank
Ready?
you, sir.
Okay. Our company is Motor Technology, and we're located in East Manchester Township. That's in York County. We repair electric motors for industrial and commercial customers. We're a family business. We employ about 95 people. The proposed increases in the gross receipts taxes on natural gas, electricity, telecommunications that have a negative impact on our business and on our employees. Based on our 2016 usage, the tax increases will result in at least $4,000 of extra costs for our operation. The largest is the 5.7% gross receipts tax on natural gas. That would increase our gas cost by about $3,000. The 0.6% increase in the electricity tax would cost $530, and the 1% telephone tax increase would jump our cost up to almost $700. On that one, if that put a few telemarketers out of business, we'd be okay with that. We use natural gas to heat our building. We have a 65,000 square foot facility where we repair electric motors. But the larger utilization is actually 4 large ovens that we have. Those ovens are used for different processes in repairing electric motors. They're used to dry out moisture in shorted motors, to burn off old motor windings and coatings, and to cure the new coatings. The ovens range from 200,000 BTUs per hour up to 1.6 million BTUs. And they're as large as 8 feet by 8 feet by 14 feet, large enough to walk in, large enough to drive a tow motor in. So you get a sense that some of the motors we work on are rather sizable. The thing to remember, and it's been emphasized here already today, about gross receipts taxes, and especially the new natural gas GRT taxes, we already pay sales taxes on all this stuff. So this is a layer on the top of the tax we already pay. Has been said, taxes on taxes on taxes, and it cascades on down the road. That adds up to like 12% tax on these inputs, on the electric, on the gas, and on the telecommunications. And that's just punitive and it's counterproductive. And it's on top of the fact that natural gas prices, although they're still at historically lows, are actually up about 30% from last year. And as has already also been discussed, we have an impact tax. We're now talking about a severance tax. So it just has this increasing impact on resources that are very important to our business. The state of Pennsylvania takes this wonderful advantage that it has, and it seems to be trying to turn it into a disadvantage. Our pre-tax operating margins are only a little bit more than 1%, so every penny of extra cost takes a toll. And these aren't costs that we can pass through. They're costs that are growing faster than sales, and nobody can stay in business very long in that kind of situation, especially when you're besieged by other costs that are also escalating faster than sales, like our medical insurance. They undermine our competitiveness, they stifle growth, and they limit what we can do for our people. I have a friend, he's a fellow NFIB member, Doug Henry, who can't be here today. He's the head of Henry Molded Products over in Lebanon. His situation is even more drastic, especially on the natural gas front, than our own. If they pass this 5.7% natural gas gross receipts tax, Doug's gas costs are going to increase by $57,000. Part of the reason he's been able to expand his business, in particular to sell his products in Europe, has been because of the low energy costs in Pennsylvania. He was about to open a new line, hire 7 new people. That's not looking quite so rosy. He was also considering expanding his facility once again. Now he may have to look at his other plant in South Carolina and move the business there instead of keeping it in Pennsylvania. So it's a real threat to his company. It's a real threat to the livelihood of his employees, to Pennsylvania as a whole. As I said, the state seems determined to turn a competitive advantage into a disadvantage. On the electric side, the proposed gross receipts tax increase is smaller, and Motor Technology is a smaller user, where our annual bill is about $100,000. So the impact on us is not as large as it is compared to others. However, due to the nature of our business, we have a kind of bird's eye view into the much larger impact on others, specifically on our customers. As I said, we repair electric motors. Electric motors consume 50% of all the electricity in the United States. They consume 70% of the electricity used by industrial and commercial companies. Some of the companies up to 85% of their electric costs go into electric motors. So in other words, motors are very energy intensive. There are millions of them, and they're everywhere. They run everything. Motors run fans, pumps, compressors, mixers, pressers, machine tools, hoists and cranes, conveyors, and all kinds of equipment. Business can't run without motors, and motors can't run without lots of electricity. To give a couple of examples, a small single 40 horsepower motor, about this big, running 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year, which is not uncommon in a small industrial or process operation, at 7 cents a kilowatt hour, the annual electric bill on that motor would be $5,862. That includes all the cost, distribution, the kilowatt hours, et cetera. A small company could easily have 20 of those horsepower motors. That would add up to $117,000 of electricity annually. The extra cost with the increased gross tax, receipts tax, would add up to $664 in that small company. Another larger example, because we have some large customers too, a 200 horsepower motor. Now it's more the size of this table compared to the one in front of me before. Operating on the same sort of schedule, that would cost $29,300 of electricity per year. These motors, the electricity that runs them in the course of a year costs much more than the motor ever does. Large manufacturers like Hershey Foods and Armstrong, or process companies like the former Sunoco refineries and the waste energy company Covanta, all these are motor technology customers, they typically have more than 100 of these 200 horsepower motors at any one facility and run them 3 shifts. That can cost $8.8 million per year for each of them. These are our customers. The extra cost, even with just a 1/6% increase in the gross receipts tax, would cost them $50,000. A lot of them would be a lot more than that. The Cabanas of the world are even more energy intensive, have even more electric motors. To put it in broader perspective, last year at Motor Technology, we repaired motors that added up to 1.4 million horsepower, okay? Those motors represent an annual electric operating cost of $205 million. On a 60 basis point increase in the gross receipts tax, that amounts to $1.2 million of extra cost. And that cost, I'm just talking about our customers within 120 miles. We don't have all the customers in that area. So within 100 miles of where we operate, that's the kind of impact we're talking about on just a few motors. Most of these companies have a lot more motors than break down in any given year. So you get a sense of the magnitude of what we're talking about in terms of the impact. And of course, what impacts them impacts us as well. So there's a secondary effect, not just what we use in energy, but to the degree our customers get hurt, that comes back and bites us as well. But it's anyhow, the points I was trying to make, it's easy to see, how what is being passed off as a little minuscule increase in the task, adds up to hundreds of millions of dollars. But what it obscures are the $4,000 and the $57,000. That's the real story, and that's the real impact. And this macro budget boon that they're anticipating doesn't really outweigh or justify the myriad micro harms to the Pennsylvania companies and its people.
Just first of all, Tom is no relation to me. He comes from a much better family.
We come out of coal country, so I wouldn't be so sure about that.
Yeah, good point. Then we may be related. I'm going to be with Doug Henry tomorrow, and he's going to be providing me with some of the input. Whatever I do get, I'll be happy to share with the other members.
That's good. I only spoke for him. I was asked to because he's in D.C. today on. Good. That's great.
Let me ask you this. Your current operating margin's a little more than 1%. Normally when I talk to business in general, most businesses, quote, operate on a 3% margin. Is that still the case today of a 3% margin? Are we down to 1%? And when's the last time you saw a 3% margin in your business?
I'm not sure that we have ever seen it. When we see it, and I hate to admit this, it's when there are catastrophes. When there's a flood or something, motors get inundated and we see a big insurge of business, or if there's a storm of some other kind. And then for short periods of time, it can get up to 3 or 4%. But then that's because the costs are average out. But once you get through that wealth of business, you're back to this. People are shocked when they find out that's what our operating cost is. I mean, it's a very competitive business. It's a difficult business to be in. We're in a state whose industry is shrinking. We serve industry for the most part. And when manufacturers go away, that's customers leaving us. And it also is an increasingly expensive business to be in. It's technological, notwithstanding that motors themselves are pretty prosaic. They haven't changed a lot since the early 1900s when George Tesla invented it. But all the technologies that go with it, I'll give you an example. And this is why we need to invest and are finding it difficult to do at these kind of margins. We recently installed monitors at all the rides at Hershey Park. So we can sit in our office in York, Pennsylvania, and know when the motor at the top of the roller coaster is 2 weeks away from failing. And that way, when the park closes that night, we can send somebody down there to fix it before it fails while somebody's on the roller coaster 2 weeks from now. That's where the technology comes in. That's where the investment is required. And that's awfully hard to do when you're working on 1% margins. But we're trying to find ways. But it's why we look at small increases in costs like we're talking about here today. They're not so small when you're looking at that kind of margin and you're looking at other increase in costs and you're looking at the need to invest in order to stay competitive, to keep our country and our state's industries competitive.
Within that 100-mile radius, you're obviously operating in other states. Maryland's within 100, Jersey.
We don't really go so much into Jersey. We
I
do
don't
go a little
blame
bit
you.
in Delaware.
How is the market comparable there to in Pennsylvania as far as business climate and costs?
We start with Maryland. There's a little thing called the Mason-Dixon line, and we're closer to Baltimore than we are to Philadelphia, but somehow it's harder to get business out of there than it is out of Philadelphia. Philadelphia's the toughest place to do business. Forget other states. They just have regulations out the kazoo and extra fees and charges out the kazoo. And then the second most difficult, again, is not a state, it's dealing with government entities, be it the state or the municipalities. They beat you up like you wouldn't believe. And then there are no better payers than the private sector, which is probably surprising. So I can't compare. The bulk of our business is in Pennsylvania. We do get down to West Virginia. I don't have any problems with West Virginia. We had to go through some licensing down there that's kind of odd, but that was just a revenue generation thing for them. It didn't really do with anything other than finding a way to get a little extra revenue out of us. New Jersey, to the degree we've ever been there. Once we had a truck driving through New Jersey, and believe it or not, their agents out cruising the New Jersey Turnpike, they pulled our truck over and wouldn't let it go until we had registered as doing business in their state, just because we were driving through. Yeah. So I don't know how much better or not it may be. What we see is a lot of the regulatory stuff, and Pennsylvania's gotten more than its share of that, so.
Okay, appreciate it. Any other takers on questions? No. Thank you so much. Really
Thank you.
appreciate your input on how these will affect individual businesses. Next up is Mr. Warren Hudak with Hudak and Company. And anytime you're ready,
I'll be
go
brief.
ahead.
My name is Warren Hudak. I'm president of Hudak and Company, a central Pennsylvania based accounting firm, a regional accounting firm. I'm here to represent NFIB and Pennsylvania Society of Enrolled Agents. And the Council on State Taxation also has a couple of comments for us today. Boy, I'd really like to thank this. What you're doing today really represents everything that's good about Harrisburg. You're listening and we're talking about the complexities of the business environment, so thank you. Taxes continue to be the top priority of small businesses in Pennsylvania, over and over again. We spent a lot of time today talking about taxes and how much taxes and who gets taxes. But what this bill does is so much more than that. It was described by cost as disturbing. Disturbing for a couple of reasons. It's not just the taxes and the additive effect of the taxes, it's the complexity of the taxes and what they're doing in the appeals process. They're actually accelerating the ability to appeal from 90 days to 60 days. And in the process of making these tweaks to the tax code, they plan on generating $40 million. Now, is that $40 million of new money? Or is this $40 million of money maybe the taxpayer doesn't owe? They're betting on the fact that if they make it complicated enough and make it so difficult enough for someone to comply with their tax responsibilities, that they'll miss the deadline and that they'll get the additional revenue. You know, we just went through an amnesty program just recently. It was successful from the government's perspective. But it seems extraordinary to me to believe that just because we reduced penalties and interest, all of a sudden now they're able to pay? Or was it the egregious interest and penalties that kept them from paying it in the first place? Now, I can't believe I'm going to do this, but I am. I'm actually going to talk a little bit about the IRS. There's some things that the IRS does that are kind of pretty cool. First of all, they have a statute of limitations, 10 years. They have 10 years to get their money. So the taxpayer knows there's a time certain when this matter is going to be disposed of. What's the statute of limitation in Pennsylvania? There is none. They just keep on coming and coming after you forever with unlimited resources and unlimited money. I believe there is a bill now to create a statute of limitations on the collection period right now. Is that Representative Pfeiffer? Awesome, thank you. The IRS has a date certain. You know where you stand with the IRS. We all got hit with a tax bill maybe that we can't afford, surprised at tax time for a variety of reasons. With the IRS at that time, when you file the...
You need to be in front of the mic.
When you file... When you file your federal tax, and if it's a bill you can't afford, when you electronically file it, you can request an installment agreement, as long as it meets certain criteria. Not true with the state. You have a taxpayer who wants to comply with the law. Now, in those situations where you can get an installment agreement, they're asking for 6 months. The IRS, if you meet certain criteria, 72 months. They want you to pay the bill, but they don't want to put you out of business if you're a business, and they don't want you to make choices between prescription drugs or food and your tax bill. There are things the Commonwealth can do to help a taxpayer comply. Making it more difficult to comply, adding costs to the process, is more difficult. The nature of a small business is very simple. I just brought on a new client. He said to me, Warren, things are different today. I've been hit with tax bills over the last 2 years that, quite frankly, I'm surprised. I must have hit a new tax bracket. After reviewing his tax return, his net income after expenses was $33,000. We're not talking about big business here. We're not talking about there's a lot of money. We're talking about people who have limited resources, many of which try to do it themselves. And it isn't until they get into a lot of trouble that they start borrowing from their credit cards to pay their accountant to bail them out of trouble that they got into in the first place. Pennsylvania doesn't have a true taxpayer's bill of rights. You know, the IRS does. They codified it. Nina Olson, the taxpayer advocate, said, you know, every taxpayer should have a right to representation. Every taxpayer should know where they stand. There should be a definite time when the audit's done, or a definite time when you know, they have to pay the bill. Statute of limitations. If the IRS can do it, we can do it. Reasonable cause. In Pennsylvania, if you want to be friendly, help taxpayers comply and generate more revenue, help them comply. We don't have a reasonable cause. Small businesses find themselves in trouble because of circumstances. They're not trying to avoid taxes. The IRS has a very strict set of reasonable cause rules. If you meet certain conditions, they'll grant you reasonable cause and abate penalties. They're not waiting for a special amnesty period. There's an acknowledgement that small businesses operate differently. When there's a new requirement, a larger business sends it down to the accounting department. A small business, he picks up the accountant, phone to the accountant if he has the money. Otherwise, he tries to fix it himself. And what ends up happening? He ends up missing deadlines or doesn't understand the deadlines. We had a member, one of our PSEA members, one of their clients was assessed with a $22,000 sales tax bill. They didn't know it. They just missed the deadline, and they can't appeal unless they go to Commonwealth Court. Very expensive proposition. Should never happen to a small business owner. Cost believes that not enough information is being provided on where they come up with the $40 million in this part of the bill. And this is the most egregious part of the bill for us. So with that, I'd like to just open it up.
Warren, thank you, and by the way, it's great to see you again. Well, I had a meeting this morning with a group of CPAs, and they reiterated some of it that you just mentioned, but they also mentioned the sudden influx of Schedule Cs without any specific information that was coming in. They also said that they were getting a lot of tax assessments under this amnesty for small dollar amounts, where people were paying it just because the cost of adjudicating it was so great. Are you seeing that?
We absolutely are, and all of our members have been talking about it. As a matter of fact, I should have mentioned it in my statement, but universally that's true, the Schedule C audits. And what we're seeing is they come after you every year for the same request.
That's what they said.
And the problem is you know, small business owners, they do their best to keep their records clean and remember to maintain them, but every once in a while it doesn't happen. Now, even the IRS, the Cohen case, the guy who wrote Yankee Doodle Dandy, wrote a royalty check out to a guy who unfortunately passed away before he got the receipt, and he got audited. And Justice Hand did the deciding opinion back in the 30s, this was, that said, look, we know that this business has to spend money for these things or else they wouldn't be in business. I know they don't have the receipt, but we're going to allow it anyway. You know, in Pennsylvania, they're not going to make that kind of allowance. Again, here's a circumstances where even the IRS has more understanding than our beloved Commonwealth. What's the slogan?
Taxavania?
Pursue happiness, right?
Oh.
That's what we want, to pursue happiness. I think it should be a friendlier state.
Just so the members are aware, of the $114 million that we collected, we paid a $5 million commission to an outside group for that, and I'm asking for a copy of the contract to find out how that was awarded. We received $114 million from the tax amnesty, and we paid well, we actually paid $9 million out, but $5 million that went to an outside consulting firm, which is where we believe some of this may be emanating from. I don't know that yet because we're still researching it, but as soon as we get details, Seth, I'll get it to the committee.
The secretary, Kastchek, has some really nice information on the demographics of just who it is that we benefited from the tax amnesty program. And the lion's share of it is big business, and the lion's share of it is out-of-state business. Those are the people who aren't, it's not the plumber down the street, it's not the diner around the corner, it's those out-of-state businesses. But I will tell you, be careful how you tread there. There was a proposal here where we would have to collect and remit taxes from our out-of-state vendors on a monthly basis. That's terribly scary. Cost actually said that it's unheard of. It was tried in another state, it didn't work. Can you imagine presenting your payment to your vendor? They asked for $1,000 and you gave them $900. They're going to say, wait a second, you didn't pay your bill. We're not going to do business until it's paid in full. You say, wait a second, the state's making me do it. Well, they don't care. They're just going to go some other state and do it.
Warren, thank you for joining us. Question about the appeals process, the rollback from 90 days to 60 days.
Right.
So in a practical standpoint, you have small business, needs to appeal something. How does that whole process work from kind of start to finish, and how does that 30-day, removal of those extra 30 days really play into this from a taxpayer standpoint? And from a practicality standpoint of getting an appeal together, what do you lose in those 30 days?
Well, I think what we're talking about here is we got to take the perspective from the small business owner, right? He came in today and the dishwasher didn't show up, right? So at the end of the day, he's got a bunch of receipts in the car that he's been meaning to get to for the last 3 weeks and get over to his accountant, and he forgets. It's as simple as that. The line goes down, and he's working on the machine shop. His manager quits, and he's the manager. Being sensitive to how businesses work, live, and play is very important for many small businesses. When they come into the morning and turn the key to come into the door in the morning, they're the only one who thinks it's going to work out that day. Everybody else, the mother-in-law, the father-in-law, the sister and the brother, they're saying, you're crazy. Why do you do this every day? Look at you. You're a mess. You know, they're dreamers. Every big business wants to be a big business. Every business wants to innovate. We talked about this just recently. Tom had the thing where they're monitoring the rides from York, Pennsylvania to Hershey Park. Well, that's innovation. You don't get that from large business. You know, half of those employed in the Commonwealth are employed by small business. 2 out of 3 new jobs are small business jobs. You've got to be sensitive and make it easier to comply. You want more money? Make it easy to comply. Allow us to do an installment agreement when we file the tax return.
So then, with the appeals process, what about, the IRS appeal process or other similar states around us? What is their time period? So
90 days.
90 days.
Now,
So, and 90 days is the standard across the board, typically. For
I
appeals?
think there are some states that have moved it to 60, but the IRS is 90 days. It's an arbitrary thing. There could be only one purpose in the context of this bill, to moving it. And it's the context that's troublesome. The context is, by moving it and shortening the appeal period that you have to appeal, serves one purpose in this context. It's to generate more revenue. Well, that can only mean one thing. Taxpayers who really don't have a bill choose not to do it because of either the expense or the missed deadline. It's as simple as that.
And then, so if you miss the deadline and have to file in Commonwealth Court, how much is that?
Well, if you want to do it yourself, not a lot, just your time. And in small business, time is everything.
Time is money.
But, a complaint of that nature may $10,000, $20,000 for a small business. Talking about a new small business who's in a tax bracket they never experienced before, who's supporting his family on $33,000, tells the whole story.
Thank you.
Oops. Thank you for coming today. Yesterday, Seth and Krista and I went through the tax code bill, okay? And one of the questions we got to was a marketplace provider in the collection of the internet tax or sales on those providers. Do you know how the Senate's definition of a marketplace provider in this bill differed from the one that we had in the House?
I don't know the difference, and we've got, the PSEA is putting together a committee right now to look at those nuances and also study the research project that Revenue delivered to everyone and go through that line by line as well. So once we've finished our work, we'd be glad to share it with you.
Okay.
But quite frankly, I mean, the marketplace bill just it substitutes the taxpayer's responsibility and shifts it in part to that marketplace provider, assuming that all marketplace providers are Google. And what about innovation in that space? What are we doing to the boundaries of entry in that marketplace? I mean, in order to be a provider of those kinds of services, think about this, okay? We talk about affiliate nexus statute all the time, and we've talked about that in the past, and particularly with the Department of Revenue's new interpretation of the sales tax law. But let's say I'm a belt buckle manufacturer in Pennsylvania, and I have a website, and I get people driven to my website because I do really nice belt buckles. But I have a friend that I met at a conference, and he's from Texas, and he does cowboy hats. And I thought, if I took these cowboy hats and put them on my website and we marketed together, we would be able to maybe double the traffic to both our sites and sell more belt buckles and more cowboy hats, except for the problem of what constitutes nexus. Now all of a sudden, who's responsible for the taxes? Am I responsible for Texas taxes? Is he responsible for Texas taxes? I don't know. Now we layer a whole level of complication. Before, there was a big bright light. If you physically enter a state in one way or another, you were responsible for that business activity. Now, I acknowledge things have changed, and we're moving into states in other ways, in meaningful ways. And there's a court case walking through now called, it's a Texas case, or Alabama, excuse me. It's an Alabama case, and it basically coined a new term called economic nexus. And I'm not really sure what that is yet, except for it's going to be different in every state. And that's troubling, because now all of a sudden I've got to comply with 5 or 6 states. I've got a bunch of clients. They're new businesses, they're growing, and they're starting to do business in Delaware, in Maryland. Now all of a sudden we're not just talking about Pennsylvania tax code. They've got to comply with all this stuff and make it work somehow. And it's mind-blowing. And all we're asking for is simplicity and certainty. NFIB over the last 10 years has been very consistent with simplicity and certainty. And now, certainty isn't just what's going to be in this bill. We've got huge, massive structural problems, whether it be pensions or entitlement programs. We need drastic reform all the way across the board. There's absolutely no question about it. Math is just not working out. You can only nickel and dime us so much and make it so complicated before you have to really look at the real problem and solve the problem. All these gimmicks and accelerating due dates and causing taxpayers to not be able to meet their tax obligations is just not the way to go. And this represents all of that and more. I mean, I've been working with costs for many years. For him actually to use the word, "this is disturbing," is striking.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Warren. I want to go back to what Representative Ryan was talking about with the Schedule Cs. I've had a ton of constituents come in and talking to me. You get plumbers who've got a van load of parts and that sort of thing. They go in and work on a project, and they're trying to account for all that stuff. Electricians, the same kind of a thing. I've got a couple who have basically told me, I'm just going to throw my hands up and see what happens. My question to you is, for their sake, what are the implications of doing that? Because right now with the shortened appeals, and if the state comes back and starts making large assessments, can you kind of walk through that for the benefit of the small business owners who are, just like you said, you know, they get interrupted in the middle of something and the receipt's not there, but prior court precedence has already said that this is a normal cost. But could you please walk through that for me?
Well, okay, so by statute with the IRS, during the process, there are things called tolling events. So basically, if you engage in a certain process, whether it be offer and compromise, good luck getting an offer and compromise with the Commonwealth, but they do have them. What they do is they start tolling that statute of limitations during that process. In Pennsylvania, we don't do that. You may be able to convince somebody to put a hold on the account, but there's really no tolling of the statute. It just continues to clock. So while our taxpayers or our small businesses are struggling to find the solution to their problem and gather the information, this clock keeps on ticking and ticking and ticking and ticking until they run out of time. I do believe that the Commonwealth can do much better with that. The appeals process is confusing. Most practitioners do a terrible job with state representation, a horrible job with state representation, because it isn't clearly defined and the education isn't always there. Now, the PSEA has strictly IRS education, and then we also have state education, which is a little different. But if the practitioner doesn't understand the process, how could the taxpayer possibly do it? It's actually that complicated and that money. You get an officer and they start with the audit process, and it turns into a fishing expedition. That's a lot of our clients, and it's to the Schedule C thing. In large part, that's what it is. You know, once that taxpayer has answered those questions satisfactorily, the next year, why the same set of questions? In the hopes that they just misplaced their records? And that actually happened to one of our clients. They just didn't have the records. Now, the good news is he went through an IRS audit for the same period, and we evoked the Gowen case that what I referenced earlier that said, look, you couldn't be in business unless you spent money in this way. You don't have the receipts, but you know you had to have done it. It's like, you know, you're a diner and you don't have any milk receipts. Well, you know what? We know you're buying milk. So we're going to use some industry standards to be able to address that. So it goes to the heart of the inquiries. These inquiries aren't to get to the right tax amount. These are inquiries made to generate revenue in the hopes that he misplaced his milk receipts, in the hopes that he missed his raw materials receipts or his energy bills or things like that. Now, we know some of these things you can get, but some of these things you can't get. Once you've bought them, once you've went over to Staples, that's gone. If you don't have the receipt, there's no proof. If you're printing on paper and you don't have your paper bill, let's be realistic, okay? We should make an allowance for the paper. It's just reasonable.
Warren, part of the Senate fiscal note when we were going over this yesterday, there's obviously appeals and revenue maximization was the term. Now, tax appeals reform is actually in the bill. But revenue maximization, I've never seen language on. I haven't seen a plan. I haven't seen anything on Department of Revenue's website. Is that sending the auditors in to find revenue?
That's a good question.
Or is it unilateral tax changes they're going to make?
Well-
I know I had a business recently contact me that hauling of grease traps is now taxable under the sales tax when it wasn't prior taxable, and there's a little bit of infighting in that. I mean, are we going to start seeing auditors come in and start kind of making up what is taxable and not taxable during the audit? Like, have you seen anything on this, or?
No. Okay, and actually, cost raised the exact same issue. Where's the 40 million coming from? I mean, what do they mean by this? And I think it's a question, for revenue, to say, what do you mean by this? I believe, and I think that the first blush is some of the things we talked about today, the acceleration of the due date, the sending out the notices saying, we want to see those records again this year, okay? I want a letter from your employer again this year to say that those unreimbursed employee expenses are actually legitimate. Well, you got the letter last year. Can I use the same letter, right? I thought when we signed our tax return, that was saying that I swear that this is true and correct. Why another affidavit saying that the thing that you asked about the second time is actually true and correct? I already did that when I signed the tax return. It's those kinds of things. And to the extent that taxpayers don't understand, it's not uncommon at the end of the year for the taxpayer to show up with a bunch of notices that they paid. And you say, wait a second, you didn't know that money, why'd you pay it? Well, I didn't want to bother you, I know you're busy, and it wasn't that much, so I just paid it. Well, how much is that going on? We had one customer, because they had they had hotel in the name. They ended up with an amnesty notice saying, where's your hotel taxes? Another one of our members got a $2 million assessment for sales tax, and all they were going off of is the 1099K that they got reported at the end of the year. That's what your merchant, when you swipe your credit card, they report to the IRS, and it comes down to the state of how much your customers spent at your establishment during the course of the year. Well, they based the assessment all on that, not whether or not they were taxable or non-taxable. Can you imagine missing the deadline on that one?
Wow.
I promise you, I may be able to help you on this one. I just had a taxpayer on this particular issue this morning, and what he said is if they came in and, like on a sales and use tax, audited a 30-day window, they would then extrapolate that over the period of time that you were in business, and that's the tax bill you would get.
Wow.
Mr. Hudak, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, and we'll provide additional information as the different groups
Yeah.
come through with their
I appreciate
analysis.
that. That'd be great. And the last testifier of the still of the afternoon is Thurston Powers, Public Policy Analyst for American Legislative Exchange Council. Thank you for powering through to the very end, Thurston.
Unfortunately, I did not bring any baked goods, and I apologize. Lesson learned for next time. So, good afternoon. I want to thank Chairman Grove and Wagner, as well as the members of the Taxpayer Caucus, for the opportunity to testify today. As you may be aware, I'm a legislative analyst for the Tax and Fiscal Policy Task Force at the American Legislative Exchange Council, and today I'm representing ALEC Action. I specialize in state tax, budget, and pension reform policy. ALEC is the nation's largest nonpartisan voluntary membership organization of state legislators. I work with our members to develop sound tax policy, budget policy, and reduce the burden of government on individuals and businesses, freeing them to create jobs and opportunity. The amended House Bill 542 is estimated to increase Pennsylvania's total tax burden by $570 million, 85% of which will come from the expansion of the gross receipts tax to natural gas sales and a severance tax on its extraction. There are many ways to collect tax revenue, but few taxes are as destructive as the gross receipts tax. How you tax matters, and the proposed tax structure violates nearly all sound principles of taxation: transparency, simplicity, economic neutrality, reliability, competitiveness, equity, and fairness. Alternatives to a tax hike exist and should be explored before resorting to raising taxes, which are already high in your state. This has been well understood by, a priority-based budget would help legislators identify those aspects of the state budget that must be funded, what aspects they would like to fund, and what items are not necessary for the state to function, such as special tax carve-outs, credits, and grants. The tax structure of the gross receipts tax is inherently flawed and uniquely destructive relative to other taxes. This has been well understood by economists for over 200 years. In Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, Smith correctly attributes the underperformance of Spanish transaction-heavy sectors, manufacturing and agriculture, to the gross receipts tax. Under a gross receipts tax, industries that are transaction-heavy face a higher tax burden than those who are not, violating tax equity and fairness. Where a sales tax is ideally applied to the final sale of a good or service, the gross receipts tax is applied to every transaction from producer to consumer. With each transaction, the total tax burden grows. Economists call this tax pyramiding. Blue-collar and food service industries tend to be the hardest hit by gross receipts tax due to their high volume of business-to-business transactions. For example, in 2002, a study of Washington's gross receipts tax revealed that food services and energy production face nearly 5 times the tax pyramiding as information technology and financial services. In order to reduce tax burdens from the gross receipts tax, businesses will engage in vertical integration where possible. Vertical integration under equal tax treatment can be efficient. However, when businesses engage in vertical integration due to tax incentives, it is most likely inefficient. For example, imagine if you wanted to start a brewery and there was a 100 mil gross receipts tax on alcohol production and distribution. The transactions between the farmer, the granary, the brewery, the distributor, and the store will be taxed at 100 mils each step. However, if you purchase the entire supply line, you'd be able to sell more or less tax-free beer and beat your competition on price. Consumers would end up with a lower quality beer because the gross receipts tax priced the otherwise consumed beers out of the market. A tax system should treat businesses equitably as possible by having a flat, low rate with a broad base and no tax pyramiding. That is impossible with a gross receipts tax. By design, it will tax different companies at different rates, regardless of their net incomes. About half of Pennsylvania residents will face higher heating costs due to the proposed gross receipts tax and severance tax, about $150 a family. But many would never know that they are being taxed more. This is because the effective rate of the gross receipts tax varies by the number of transactions between producer and consumer, and also the fact that it's hidden. The total tax burden on a gross receipts tax on natural gas would be the gross receipts tax, the severance tax, the impact fees, the corporate income taxes, the sales taxes, and the personal income taxes paid by natural gas producers. These taxes are passed on to the consumer in the form of higher prices. The portion of the price attributable to the tax burden is invisible to the citizen. Tax systems must be accountable to the citizens. Taxes and tax policy should be visible, easy for the average citizen to understand, and it should minimize the cost of complying with tax laws. The gross receipts tax fails on all accounts. Rather than being expanded to natural gas, it should be replaced with a more modern tax structure. Proponents of the amended House Bill 542 argue that the application of a severance and gross receipts tax to natural gas is equitable treatment, as other states have similar taxes. This ignores the fact that Pennsylvania's competitors, such as Texas, tend to have lower or no corporate income taxes, personal income taxes, or sales taxes on equipment that natural gas companies purchase. In comparison, Pennsylvania has the 49th highest corporate income tax in the country. The idea that any business in Pennsylvania is not paying their fair share is hard to imagine, with the exception of those private businesses receiving state funding through special tax treatment. When considering all the taxes Pennsylvania natural gas producers pay, their total effective tax rate is high compared to other states, and the proposed tax hikes would not place Pennsylvania on a competitive footing with Texas, but rather hamstring the state. As Elizabeth Stella at the Commonwealth Foundation wrote, "If Texas really is the model to follow, then any severance tax proposal should include eliminating the corporate income tax, eliminating the personal income tax, and streamlining Pennsylvania's regulatory regime." Revenues gained through the proposed gross receipts tax and severance tax will likely come at the expense of personal and corporate income tax revenue. Rich States, Poor States, an annual study of economic performance and outlook informed by state policy, demonstrates how people and their businesses regularly vote with their feet in response to uncompetitive tax structures. From 1992 to 2011, approximately 62 million taxpayers moved from one state to another. They took $2.2 trillion of adjusted gross income with them. The trend is clearly in one direction, from high tax states to low tax states. In Pennsylvania, the state lost $9.3 billion to Florida, $4 billion to the Carolinas, and $1 billion to Texas in taxable income between 1992 to 2015, a total of 230,000 residents. If the gross receipts tax is expanded, people will likely migrate to more competitive states. The last thing Pennsylvania needs is taxable income walking away, particularly when income taxes contribute to 51% of the general fund revenue. Even if the severance tax and gross receipts tax did not cost jobs, if Pennsylvania grows dependent on discriminatory taxes to support the general fund, it will set the state on a path to more frequent and worse budget battles. Discriminatory taxes have smaller, less diversified bases, which are often subject to macroeconomic trends. The problems with the gross receipts tax and severance tax can already be seen in the impact fee revenue. Impact fees have fallen with oil prices, contributing to the current budget crisis. As global energy prices fluctuate, so will the revenue for the general fund. If passed, Pennsylvania will be flush with cash when oil is at $80 a barrel. It would then likely expand services. And then it would have to cut or make increased taxes when oil falls to $40 a barrel. A tax system should be stable, providing certainty in taxation and revenue flows. It should provide certainty of financial planning for individuals and businesses. Historically, flat, broad-based sales taxes have offered the most stability and growth. Now, while tax modernization is certainly something Pennsylvania would benefit from, it's not necessary to close the current budget deficit. Eliminating most, if not all, of the state's tax preferences and grants would reduce state expenditures more than the proposed taxes would raise revenue. Put simply, if the state has the money to spare on special tax carve-outs, do not ask Pennsylvanians to pay more to heat their homes.
I have more of a comment. You had said that the tax system must be transparent, has to be visible to the taxpayers. Like we need to understand where it's going. And with a gross receipts tax, it's so convoluted. You don't know what you're being. It's invisible. Similar, we're in the same predicament with healthcare costs, right? We don't know what it really costs anymore, so we just go to the doctor completely unaware of the true costs of anything. And that's kind of how they've gotten us. So eventually we get to the crisis point, right? Where we say, okay, let's just do third-party payer and we're done, we're out, because we can't afford anymore. This type of taxation lends itself to the same type of overreach and growth of government in general. Because you're always going to be in crisis mode, right? As soon as the economy's down, so are your gross receipts taxes. You've lost that tax base. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Thurston. We were out in Denver with you guys and several others here a couple weeks ago, and we had to learn or sit and listen to the governor of Kentucky talking about how much business he's going to be taking away from other states, including the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And it absolutely is driving me crazy. My district is up a lot closer to Erie, where we just lost over 500 jobs with General Electric moving to Texas. Again, another state you what are the key things that you see as far as the the taxes? Is it actually the corporate net income tax, or what is the key first step?
I think that the first step is to cut the grants and sort of tax advantages. As the Commonwealth Foundation pointed out, there's $800 million of transfers. And some of them can be looked at. I've got a list here. In terms of the tax structure, I was surprised when I learned that Pennsylvania has such a comprehensive and long-lived gross receipts tax. Usually those are passed out of desperation, such as the Great Recession and the Depression. Actually, the Depression was a really time of expansion for the gross receipts taxes. And usually they are overturned pretty quickly because they are absolutely destructive, and they create more deadweight loss in terms of like economic loss than any other tax that I can think of. So the money you're getting from a gross receipts tax, if you had taxed that much money using a different tax, like a sales tax, you would have more economic growth. Put it another way, the cost of pulling that money out of the economy through a gross receipts tax is large, perhaps the largest way to do it.
Did want to recognize Representative Cheryl Delosier sitting in the back, hiding in the back of the room. Thank you, Cheryl, for joining us. First, in your analysis of looking at other states and how they do kind of severance tax, does any other state have a severance tax and an impact fee?
So I have a list of states and the sort of taxes that they have. I know that Texas, for example, has a severance fee. But in terms of the mixture of severance taxes and impact, the Tax Foundation might have a updated sheet that separates the two. The problem with that is sometimes that the states will have one or the other, and depending on how they're calculated, they're difficult to compare.
Got you. We've seen work where our current impact fee is about a 9.2% severance tax. I think the severance tax they're looking at is, are they saying like a 2%? Is that around 2? What are the rates of the other states? Do you have a kind of a rate analysis there on average?
Yes, so Texas has a 7.5% of market value severance tax. And then Louisiana has a 3 cent to 13 cent per MCF. Oklahoma has a 7% plus a like 0.1% excise tax. Wyoming has a 6% of taxable value. Colorado has 2 to 5% gross income. Yeah, so there's a list that I can provide with to you.
Okay. And then from what you've seen of other states that have a large percent of their budgets predicated on kind of the commodity-based taxes, or the severance tax, or they have something on coal, how have their budgets fared over the past few years as the price fell out of those kind of commodities?
It certainly has contributed to a lot of the budget fights over the past 5 years. When you are dependent on something that is outside of your state's control, like for example, like you brought up General Electric. I'm from Connecticut. They left us. We drove them out with taxes, actually. So Connecticut relied heavily on returns on the stock market in terms of their income taxes, especially in the 80s. A large portion of our budget came from capital gains. And so as the stock market fluctuated, our budget would either sink or swim. You don't want to do the same thing with oil prices. You want to diversify your general fund as much as possible in terms of having a broad-based sales tax. Because if you become too dependent on one thing, particularly something outside of your control, it can really destroy your budget.
those states that saw their budgets fold because they have a high percentage of their tax revenue coming from these commodity type taxes, how did they fill their coffers? Did they raise taxes on the energy field? Did they reduce spending? Did they initiate other taxes? I assume a lot on that list probably don't have an income tax, and/or a sales tax. Did they initiate those kind of bigger taxes? Do you know off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head, no, but I imagine that, like, for example, Texas probably increased property taxes. I've been hearing grumbling about that.
Okay.
But, yeah, specifically in terms of how they coped with it, I'll get back to you on that.
Okay, I appreciate that. Any other questions? Kristen?
Thurston, thank you for being here today. So one of the things we know is that taxes change behavior, right? There's two sides to this conversation on a severance tax. One side says that, it's not really going to change anything, that, these folks need to pay, and it's not going to impact business or cost. The other side says, it will definitely change behavior. For example, I have children who attend college in Philadelphia. They now purchase their soda outside of Philadelphia because of the beverage tax there. When these taxes are enacted, you've studied them across the country, what happens?
So, in terms of energy production, the key thing is sort of the cost of getting things out of the ground to refine and getting them to market. That's what determines whether or not you drill. So when oil was at, $80, $110, it made a lot of sense, for example, to look at the tar sands, to look at like South Dakota. And as those prices dropped, people were like, well, it costs a lot to do this, and the margins aren't as great as we can get with oil. So if you think about taxes, it's sort of like adding more burdens, more costs to extracting. Now, Pennsylvania is fantastic for shale, but if you increase taxes to the point where the cost of extracting it out of your state is so high that other forms of energy become viable, or other natural gas fields become less expensive in comparison as they won't have those taxes, people will probably start shifting their operations, probably not hiring in this state instead of hiring in other states. The idea that people won't respond to the change in the cost of doing business in your state has been time and time again disproven. Now, earlier we were talking about whether or not the consumer would eat the cost of the tax or the producer. Either way, you're either scaring away personal income tax revenue by throwing these costs onto the consumer and they go to other states, or if it ends up on the producer, they face a higher cost of producing natural gas in your state, and that might cause them to think about expanding operations somewhere else next time that becomes available to them.
Thank you.
Thurston, thank you so much for your testimony, as well as the other individuals who provided testimony today. Safe travels back down the 83 to the DC Beltway.
Thank you all.
That's it for our hearing today. We will be holding a couple more hearings around the state from the Taxpayers Caucus to gauge the effects of the comprehensive tax package in front of us so we can make the best decisions on behalf of the residents of Pennsylvania. Thank all my colleagues for coming out today, for their interest in this, and obviously the testifiers and those from the general public out today as well, for wanting to find out more about what's happening in their state government. Until next time, Grove, on behalf of our colleagues, and special thanks to Dawn for hosting this awesome event today as well. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.